Join me as I challenge myself to uncover the scariest horror stories from park rangers. Can I handle their creepiest tales? Tonight, we're going to delve into the hidden horrors that park rangers encounter while on duty in remote areas. From creepy sounds in the darkness to mysterious disappearances, we'll explore the darkest corners of the wilderness and uncover the truth behind these terrifying tales. So, if you're ready to face your fears and delve into the unknown, then strap in and let's get started. But before we dive in, I want to warn you. What you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. These stories are graphic, they're disturbing, and they're downright terrifying. So, if you're easily spooked or have a weak stomach, then you might want to skip this video altogether. If you've got a story to share about your own eerie experience in nature, or if you've got a topic you'd like me to explore in a future video, then hit that comment section below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more thrilling content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. My name is Ethan Blake, and for the last 10 months, I've been living in a secluded cabin deep within Redwood National Park. The solitude was exactly what I needed. My only companion was Shadow, my loyal German Shepherd, and the occasional hiker who'd pass by my remote place. I had no idea that something evil was lurking in the shadows of these ancient woods. It started last week during a hike with Shadow on the familiar path to Tall Trees Grove. We stumbled upon something disturbing. People had been reported missing in these woods lately, but what we found was beyond unsettling. We came across a giant redwood tree that had been defaced. It looked like someone or something had used it as a grotesque canvas, finger painting with blood and guts. My first thought was a bear attack, though that didn't explain the bizarre, almost deliberate patterns smeared onto the bark. The next day, I had to venture into town for supplies. My food was running low. At Hemlock's general store, I casually mentioned what Shadow and I had found on our hike, hoping Old Man Hemlock might offer a logical explanation, maybe ease my growing unease with some innocent misunderstanding. His reaction chilled me. Hemlock leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a genuine fear in his eyes that amplified my own. "Ethan," he said, "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Ranger Thompson been patrolling these woods his whole life. He went out hunting after his wife disappeared about a month back." He paused, then continued gravely, "Never came back, Ethan. Never came back. You should think about moving on from that cabin." I scoffed at the idea. Leaving my sanctuary, unthinkable. Trying to lighten the mood, I mentioned, "Did you hear about Sarah Jenkins and that otter that stole her purse? Ran off, then came back later wearing her necklace." But the unsettling encounters in the woods continued. So did the hushed reports of missing people. It was all anyone whispered about. Sleep became a luxury. Even Shadow was on edge, constantly growling at faint noises outside the cabin. The peaceful refuge I'd found was becoming tainted by an eerie atmosphere. Then came that night. I was settling in, trying to ignore the gnawing unease, when a blood-curdling scream ripped through the stillness. It sliced through the night like a razor. Shadow shot up, hackles raised, barking ferociously towards the sound. A cold dread washed over me. Fear clamped down, tight and suffocating. I grabbed my shotgun and a flashlight and ran out into the night, Shadow leading the way, following the sounds of chaos tearing through the quiet woods. We burst into a small clearing, and there, under the stark illumination of the full moon, I saw it for the first time. The creature towered over its victim, or what was left of him. It resembled a monstrous wolf, but standing upright on two grotesquely long, twisted legs. Its matted fur was reeking of decay, and fresh, crimson blood dripped from its jagged, monstrous maw onto its gnarled limbs. Instinct took over. I aimed my shotgun at the creature's massive chest and fired twice in rapid succession. The beast recoiled with a sickening, guttural howl, but seemed unharmed. Worse, the gunshots had only drawn its attention to me. Its eyes, burning with a terrifying fire, locked onto mine. With lightning speed, it lunged in my direction, covering ground at an impossible pace. I turned and ran, adrenaline flooding my veins, Shadow barking and racing at my side. My heart hammered in my ears, the creature's heavy footfalls pounding closer and closer behind us. I needed help, but there was no one for miles. Panic and the dense forest disoriented me. We burst out of the trees and onto the main road, the monster still hot on our heels. Gasping for breath, I waved frantically at an approaching pickup truck. It slowed just in time for me to flag it down. Help. I screamed at the driver. There's a creature chasing me. The driver's eyes widened in terror as he saw the beast emerge from the woods behind us. He threw open the passenger door, and we scrambled inside. He slammed on the gas, leaving the creature in a cloud of dust. Neither of us spoke for a long moment, both in shock. As we sped away, we finally exchanged names. He was Mark. Further conversation was impossible, lost in the shared terror. We reached the relative safety of a roadside diner, filled with people, a beacon of normalcy in the night. I asked Mark for his phone to call the local authorities. Minutes after giving our location and a frantic description of the unknown threat, a fleet of squad cars arrived, sirens wailing. Mark and I gave our statements, carefully avoiding speculation about the creature's origins or motives. But the officers' faces grew increasingly grim with each gruesome detail about its size, speed, appearance, and the horrific state of its victim. Soon, animal control arrived, equipped for dealing with large predators. We could hear helicopters circling overhead as they began coordinating a search through the woods, continuing through the night until dawn. The next day, my family received a call from Sheriff Davies regarding their findings. They'd discovered several mutilated animal carcasses, clearly part of the creature's reign of terror. But the beast itself had vanished, retreating deep into the wilderness, eluding capture. Sheriff Davies offered resources to help secure my cabin, advising extreme caution if I chose to stay. Overwhelmed with fear, not just for myself, but for my family's peace of mind, I accepted help from friends and neighbors. Together, we installed heavy locks, reinforced doors, and set up motion sensor security lights around the cabin. Shadow's outdoor time was drastically reduced. We avoided wooded trails, constantly watching for any sign of the creature's return. Despite the lingering fear, life, cautiously, went on. We hesitated to stray far from the familiar safety of our homes. A pervasive unease settled over the entire community, especially those who had lost loved ones and pets. A sense that life would never be quite the same again. That a new darkness had crept into our lives, touched by this predatory beast. The creature continued to haunt our collective memory. Whispers and rumors about its origins and motives resurfaced constantly, though most were met with skepticism, despite our first-hand accounts. While we will never forget those harrowing days and nights of terror, nor the lives lost during its terrifying presence in our sanctuary, we have come together as a community. We seek solace in unity and strength, promising to remain vigilant against whatever unknown threats may try to tear us apart again. My name is Jake Blackwood, and if you pinned me down and demanded a label for the sheer, unadulterated weirdness that turned my world upside down. I'd call it a damn opera of freak accidents, hitting a crescendo of terror that still makes my blood run cold. Supernatural stuff, urban legends, never bought into it. So, when I ditched the city grind for a beat-up cabin tucked away near Olympic National Park in Washington, the last thing on my mind was run-ins with Bigfoot or spooky forest ghosts. First few days, bliss, exactly what I needed. Silence, just me, the towering trees, and the kind of quiet that hums in your ears. Then, one morning, mist hanging thick in the air, I headed down the trail to Deer Creek, my usual spot for water. And that's when reality decided to take a detour into Crazy Town. Rounding a bend, I froze. Splattered all over the mossy rocks, clinging to the damp dirt on both sides of the creek, was something wrong. Rust-colored, like caked mud, but with this unsettling, sticky sheen. Confused, honestly, a little grossed out, I filled my water bottles and hauled them back to the cabin. That weird creek goo image stuck in my brain like a bad commercial jingle. Kept seeing it all day, replaying in my head. Curiosity, that nosy bastard, finally dragged me back to Deer Creek that afternoon. Kneeling down, I poked at the stuff with a twig. Not mud, definitely not mud. It could be dried blood, a hell of a lot of it. But why, out here, in the absolute middle of nowhere? A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down my spine. That evening, Pacific Northwest twilight sinking in. A weird unease settled over me, like a low hum you can't quite place. Everything looked normal. Same giant pines, same whispering wind. But something felt fundamentally off. Next day, finding even more of that rust-colored stain by the creek, and catching these fleeting glimpses of movement in the thick underbrush, just flickers at the edge of my vision. I figured I had to talk to Mike and Sarah, my closest friends out this way. We met up at Sarah's, huddled around her fire pit in the backyard, flames snapping and spitting. The usual BSing and jokes about our messed up lives died down. As I laid out the weirdness of the last few days, Mike and Sarah listened, faces tightening with every detail. By the time I finished describing that crawling feeling in the woods, a heavy silence dropped over us, thick as the woods. Mike finally broke it, taking a long pull from his beer. "Man," he said, slow and serious, "there's been whispers going round. People disappearing. Hikers found torn up, they're saying. Animal attacks, officially, but some folks are talking about something else. Something with massive claws, seriously messed up, and unnatural. Like, stretched out, all wrong." I actually laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You're kidding me, right? You think some backwoods boogeyman just decided to crawl out of the swamp and set up shop in my backyard? I'm not a jumpy guy, but this was pushing it into crazy territory." Sarah's hand, poking at the fire with a stick, was trembling just a hair. "Jake," she said, voice quiet, "it's not about believing or not. It's about being careful. Too much weird crap happening all at once to just brush it off." Sitting there, watching the firelight flicker on their faces, their unease started to get under my skin. Days later, splitting firewood right outside my cabin, that familiar rustling sound echoed from the trees again. This time, I spun around, fast, and I saw it. Monster, no other word for it. Huge, impossibly fast, it launched itself from one branch to another, swallowed by the thick trees before I could even process what I was looking at. But the image seared into my eyeballs. Twisted, stretched out shape, patchy, dark fur plastered on, sickly pale underbelly that looked almost see-through. Rows and rows of teeth, jagged and way too many, flashed in the broken sunlight, sending a shot of ice straight into my veins. It was like something ripped right out of a fever dream. Then, impossibly, it just stopped, mid-air, frozen for a split second, and looked right at me. Black eyes, pure evil, but mesmerizing in this twisted, grotesque way, locked onto mine. It bared those teeth again, thick strings of spit hanging off them, dripping, splattering onto the pine needles below. A snarl. In that single, frozen moment, instinct kicked in. I ran. Sprinting back to the cabin, I could hear it tearing through the woods behind me, branches cracking. The insane speed of it chasing me was terrifying. Felt like seconds before I stumbled through the door, slamming it shut, fumbling with the deadbolt, my heart trying to claw its way out of my chest. My phone, on the table. I grabbed it, fingers shaking, and dialed 911. Emergency. The operator's voice, calm, professional, like she was ordering coffee. I choked out the words, breath coming in ragged gasps. Creature, woods, outside my cabin. Monster, chased me. Don't know if it's still out there. Hoping for some kind of understanding, some sign she didn't think I was a complete nutjob. The operator, thank God, just said, "Patrol unit dispatched immediately, sir. Stay inside, lock your doors." Relief, thin and shaky, washed over me. Then, a bone-jarring crash against the cabin door. It was still there, trying to get in. Stumbling back, away from that flimsy door, I looked around the cabin for anything at all I could use to fight back. A fire iron, a cast iron pan. Everything felt useless, pathetic against the memory of that thing in the trees. Right then, my phone buzzed. Sarah, answering, voice tight, hushed. I quickly told her everything. Just the raw details. "Stay inside, Jake. Don't make a sound," she hissed, real panic in her voice. "I know you think we're crazy with the legends, but just be damn careful." Hours dragged by, stretched out and agonizing. I huddled in the corner, listening to the constant growls, the scraping, tearing sounds at the door, praying pointlessly that whatever it was wouldn't break through. Then, faint in the distance, sirens, hope, a tiny spark flickered in my gut. Cops, finally here. Cautiously, guns raised, they moved towards the cabin, sweeping the area. Silence. The creature was gone, just vanished, like it had melted back into the shadows of the trees. Officers piled into the cabin, checking on me, listening to my wild story. Skepticism battled with the deep gouges raked across my cabin door. They had to admit something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just some bear attack. The search area widened. Warnings went out. Stay inside. Be alert. But the sightings, the attacks, they kept happening. Sporadic, brutal, terrifying. More people went missing. Others were found, mutilated. Desperate calls for help, swallowed by the wilderness. Nobody could get there fast enough. Days turned into fear-soaked nights. Then, finally, a break in the dark. A patrol officer, out near my cabin again, radioed in, voice tight with adrenaline. He'd seen it, a pack of wolves, circling something, big. Wrong. The radio crackled, then, blessed silence. The wolves, nature's own cleanup crew, had done what we couldn't. The terror, abruptly, violently, was over. It lay dead in the woods, that thing, life, slowly, carefully, started to crawl back towards normal. But the relief was mixed with a heavy grief. The community gathered, sharing stories of those lost. finding some small comfort in shared horror. Weeks have passed now. Sun's shining, birds are singing, but the memory of that dark, twisted creature, those black, evil eyes, will haunt these woods and my sleep forever. Living in a secluded cabin deep within the Redwood Shadows National Park had always been my sanctuary. Nature's quietude was the perfect balm for my restless spirit. My name is Ethan Hayes, and every other week, I'd make the 30-minute drive down a winding dirt road to the small town of Havenwood for supplies. On one such trip, while waiting in line at Miller's General Store, I overheard an old-timer talking about a series of brutal animal attacks near the park's perimeter. He was holding a copy of the Havenwood Gazette, muttering about grisly maulings getting closer to residential areas. When he tossed the paper aside, I picked it up, my curiosity piqued. The headline screamed about gruesome discoveries, mangled bodies found in separate incidents over the past few weeks. Back at my cabin, a sense of unease settled over me, persistent as a phantom itch. Images from the newsprint danced in my mind, casting a shadow of anxiety. I briefly considered contacting the park rangers, or even holing up at the Havenwood Inn for a while. But these thoughts felt weak, cowardly. Reaching out for help felt like abandoning the haven I'd built with my own hands. Resolving not to succumb to fear, I let sleep take me as darkness draped itself over the redwoods. A gentle breeze played with the curtains, and the night chorus of crickets and rustling leaves usually soothed me. But tonight, it felt like a prelude to troubled dreams. Sometime in the dead of night, a blood-curdling scream ripped through my slumber, sharp and piercing as shattered glass. I jolted awake, cold sweat stinging my eyes, heart hammering against my ribs. I strained to listen past the frantic thumping in my chest. Another scream, closer this time, galvanized me into action. Instinct took over. I grabbed my old hunting rifle, hands trembling, laced up my boots, and swallowed down a wave of nausea fueled by adrenaline. Weapon clutched tight, flashlight beam jittering in the shadows. I scanned the moonlit woods. Another scream, closer still. It crashed over me. Someone was in mortal danger, hunted by something monstrous, something like the creature described in those chilling newspaper reports. Pushing aside the gnawing fear, I forced my legs to move, plunging into the forest towards the echoing cries of anguish. The nightmarish shrieks continued, driving me onward, visions of horror flashing in my mind. What had torn apart those unfortunate souls? Then an eerie silence descended, heavy and suffocating. The horrifying screams abruptly cut off, replaced by guttural snarls that filled the air. My breath hitched in my chest, heart pounding like a jackhammer. Terror, cold and rancid, settled deep within me. And then I saw it. Bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the towering redwoods, a massive creature hunched over a still body. Its eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity, boring into my very soul even from this distance. Several thick, tentacle-like appendages writhed menacingly towards the disfigured form beneath it. As it continued to tear at its prey, it was him, the source of those desperate cries, now silenced forever. Nauseating grunts and squelching noises clawed their way into my skull, igniting a primal rage within me. My racing heart drowned out any rational thought. The world narrowed down to this blood-soaked tableau under the cold, watchful gaze of an unholy beast. Ignoring my trembling legs and shaking hands, a desperate need to call for help surged through me. Now that this thing was right in front of me, feasting on its fresh kill, the urgency was overwhelming. I fumbled for my cell phone, desperate to summon any kind of rescue. The phone screen was barely visible in the dim forest light, but I could just make out the numbers. My fingers, clumsy with fear, struggled to dial 911. After a few fumbled attempts, I finally connected. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled on the other end. There's someone being attacked by some kind of animal in the woods. You need to send help now, I stammered, trying to keep my voice low. Stay calm, sir. Can you give me your exact location? The operator instructed. Panic flared. Location, I had no idea. The woods were dense, endless, and all looked the same in the dark. I don't know. It's too dark, no landmarks. Please, just hurry, I pleaded, desperation tightening my throat. She reassured me they would send officers to the area and told me to stay put. Then, the line went dead. Glancing back at the gruesome scene, waiting felt useless. As quietly as possible, I backed away, trying to put distance between myself and whatever grotesque creature reveled in its blood-soaked feast. The forest floor betrayed my retreat with snapping twigs and rustling leaves, but terror had twisted itself into every fiber of my being, overriding any sense of caution. Out of nowhere, those guttural snarls morphed into an ear-splitting screech as the creature lunged towards me with animalistic fury. Panic surged, and I bolted, hands clawing at tree trunks, blindly fleeing the monstrosity. Survival instinct took over. I juked and jived through the darkness, adrenaline flooding my veins. The creature's inhuman screeches tore through the air behind me, relentless in its pursuit. In a moment of desperate luck, I stumbled upon a small cave entrance, tucked away beneath gnarled roots and overgrown foliage. Driven by pure survival, I squeezed myself into the narrow space, pressing myself as far back as possible. Absolute terror coursed through me as I listened to the chaos outside abruptly cease, replaced by a sinister silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity in the suffocating darkness of my hiding place. The silence remained unbroken, unnaturally still. No birds, no animals, dared to break the oppressive quiet of this accursed place. Then, the sudden snap of a branch shattered the fragile hope that the creature had given up. Dreadful anticipation gripped me as I held my breath, listening intently. A delicate scrape of clawed extremities on stone. The sound was closing in. I bit back a scream as searing pain exploded in my left leg. The creature's appendages had found me, plunging deep into my flesh, tearing through muscle and bone. Hot tears of anguish streamed down my face. It would be over soon. There was nothing left to do but accept my fate. Then, a sound that sliced through my despair. The distant wail of approaching sirens. The officers, they were finally here. The sound grew louder, closer, driving the monstrous beast away from its grim quarry. Later, as they helped me out of that wretched cave and tended to my grievous wounds, I couldn't shake the image of the person who had fallen prey to that nightmare creature. In the days that followed, we learned of more victims. Their bodies discovered scattered across our once idyllic town, each bearing the mark of unimaginable horror inflicted by the fiend from the woods. Though I escaped the clutches of that abomination that night, my heart aches for the souls we couldn't save. My name is Ricardo Rico Ramirez, and if you pressed me to label the sheer weirdness that invaded my life, I'd have to call it a cascada of bizarre mishaps, spiraling into absolute escalofriante terror. I've always been un hombre práctico, a skeptic of anything that is made of lo sobrenatural or fantástico. So, when I decided to escape the city ruido and rent a secluded cabin near the sprawling Redwood National Park in Northern California, The last thing on my mind was some kind of encuentro cercano with creatress for the first few days. Tranquilidad reigned. Everything was perfected, towering redwoods, crisp air. But then, one mañana, as primera hiked down to a family area, arroyo, to refill my botellas. The agua reality took a sharp, unsettling gear. As I neared the arroyo's board, I stopped en seco. Staining several moss-covered rocas on both banks was something raro. It was a monco rust-colored, like lodo seco, but with this unnatural, pegajoso brillo. Confundido, I filled my bottles. The image of that extraga sustancia seared in my mind as I headed back to the cabana. The rareza of it all, now with me, all dia. Curiosidad, that relentless comezón, finally dragged me back to the arroyo that tarde for a segunda mirada. Arodolando. Examining it más de cerca, a sickening pensamiento crept into my mind. Sangre seca, but ¿por qué? Por would there be so much sangre in this quiet, secluded lugar? The pregunta hung heavy in the air. Sin respuesta y ominosa. As crepúsculo, lecinto noche, a inquietud settled over me. It was a sensación in my estómago, primal disasosiego, that whispered, algo anda mal. Even though the serene bosque around me seemed sin cambios. The next dia, the rust-colored moncas were still there, ásperos, inquietantes, and now there was something else. A sutil crujido in the maleza, just beyond the edge of my visión. It was indistinto, fugaz, but enough to erizar los pelos de mi cuello. I decided it was horror to share these extragos, desconectados incidentes, with a couple of amigos who lived in the nearest pueblo. That noche, we found ourselves huddled around a crepitant fogata in their patio trasero. The familiar ritual of cigarros and humor negro, our only consuelo against the growing inquieted as our forced reza faded. Primera recounted the eventos of the últimos días. My amigos, Javier and Sofia, listening with growing aprensión del caraz, tightening as my history unfolded. By the time I described the Moncas de Sangre and the Crujido en el Bosque, a heavy silencio had fallen over our small, as if we'd collectively brushed against something final. Javier, el estoico, finally broke T silencio, taking a long trago from his cerveza. There's been rumors, he said, his vacilante, gente desapareciendo. Others found deshicos, like some kind of attack animal, but differente. They say it's got these garras enormes, and something about its cuerpo being all mal. Y burlé de sonido agudo indequid no sham. Vamos, Javier. You can't actually creer some leyenda de pueblo. Suddenly crawled out of the sombras. Aquí mismo? Y am not easily conmocionado, but this felt like a estirón demasiado lejos. Sofia, usually the more allegory of the two, chimed in, her manos temblando, almost impossible. It's not about creer Ricardo Itese. About being seguro. Too many cosas raras happening lately to just ignore. Ter palabras hung into air, mingling with the humo and the papadient, luz del fuego. Despite my escepticismo, their desasosiego was contagioso. I couldn't completely decarter their preoccupations. Días blurred, into a tensa espera. Then, cortandolina. Just outside my cabana, I heard it again. That crujido. Más cerca esta vez. My cabeza snapped up, adrenalina surging. And then I vied. Monstro, that's the only palabra that even comes, cerca. It was anti-natural, its sheer tamaño, an imposible agilidad. Froseme fora latido. It moved like a depredador de pesadilla, leaping between sequoia's ramas with facilidad sin esfuerzo, before vanishing into the dense dosel above. Its forma was retorcida, mal, an alargado cuerpo draped in irregular, oscuro pelaje that clashed repugnantemente with its pálido, expuesto vientre, filas de dientes irregulares, demasiados dientes, flashed in a silent grunhido, and then it turned its cabeza, and its hoyos locked onto mine. Negro and puro, abismal, negro, and intelligente. In that instanty, I knew it had visto marcado me, a thick queda. The saliva dripped from its colmillos, splattering on Tisuela del Bosque in a silent amenaza. Instinto took over. Primera li corriendo, y corrí back to the cabaña. The sonido de la criatura desgarrando la maleza behind me aterradora, banda sonora, to my vuelo. Ramas se rompieron, hojas crujieron, de monstruosa persecución, gaining terreno with horrible facilidad. It felt like segundos before I slammed the puero de la cabana, torpemente, with the cerradura, corazón latiendo contra mis costillas. I lay on the mesa, 911. I mark my aliento coming in entrecortados. Jadeos. The vast tranquilla of the opera door was a stark contrast to the KOS in my cabeza in emergencia. Y vi algo. Primera ta tartamudeé, trying to force aire into my pulmones. A criatura in the bosque, outside my cabaña. It persiguió, me don't say if it's still. Ahi, I poured out the historia, de palabras cayendo unas sobre otras, desesperado for them to intend to the sheer terror of what I dejust presenciado, de operador, lesser calm profesionalismo, a su red, mea patrulla, will be despachada inmediatamente. Alivio washed over me, a momentary ola de cordura in the rising marea de pánico. Then, I ensordeced a crash against the puerta de la cabaña. It was still trying to get entra. Terror clawed at me. E tropecei back from the puerta, escaneando freneticamente for algo I could use to defend her. But to do felt endable. Against the monstruosa imagen burned into my mente. Just then, my teléfono rang en Sofía contestando. I kept my vías baja, aterrorizado of alertar whatever was on the other lado de la puerta. I quickly reconti my encuentro. The escalofriante imagen de la criatura still vívida. Quédate adentro, Ricardo. No hagas ruido, she instruyó. Voz tensa de urgencia. I know you think it's loco, but just be cuidadoso, por favor. Minutos stretched into an horas crawled by, each one puntuada by the implacable gruñidos y arañazos against the puerta, rezando por ayuda. Primera hot delayed in the sombras de la cabaña, de presencia de la criatura, a sofocante peso. Then, in the distancia, a faint sonido, sirenas, esperanza, aguda y repentina, pierz, de miedo ante policía. They were, cautelosamente, armas, desenfundadas. They approached the cabana, their linternas cutting through the oscuridad, sweeping the butt the criatura. It was Edo, disappearances, as if swallowed by the dense bosque. Oficialis entered the cabana. Their expresiones a mix of preocupación y escepticismo. Y repetí my historia pointing to the deep gouge marks raked into the puero de la cabana. Lentamente, their escepticismo began to erode. They agreed to buscar the área circundante, reconociendo, with a shared inquietud, that maybe, just tal vez, this wasn't just some animal salvage. Their búsqueda expanded. They aconsejaron me To quedarme quieto remain vigilante. But despite their increased presencia, the avistamientos continued. Aterradores vislumbres of something antinatural, each more espantoso than the more gente desapareció. More cuerpos were found, mutiladas beyond reconocimiento, always near the edges of the park. Desesperadas, llamadas de auxilio, sin respuesta. Víctimas, cayendo presa to something too rápido, demasiado fuerte. Then, finalmente, un inesperado giro en salvación. One noche, patrullando near my cabaña, an oficial caught pista of something increíble. Amaunadao de lobos, rodeando de criatura. A furiosa, desesperada batalla erupted, de sonido resonando through the silent bosque. And then, silencio. De lobos, propios ejecutores de la naturaleza, had done what we no pudimos. De criatura ley inmóvil, hits, reino de terror, abruptamente terminado. Alivio inmenso y abrumador flooded through the comunidad. But it was alivio teñido de dolor. We came juntos, sharing historias of those we'd pervada, seeking consuelo in shared trauma. Vida lentamente, tentativamente, began to arrastras back towards normalidad. But the memoria of that oscuro, retorcido criatura, the terror it unleashed, would forever perseguir those of us who had presenciado its ira in the sombras de las sequoias. They say moving to the woods is peaceful. When I, now going by the name of Stefan Brunner, bought that secluded cabin deep in the Redwood National Park, tranquility was exactly what I craved. Privacy, check. Isolation, double check. As an introverted graphic designer, it seemed like the ultimate escape. Settling into the rhythm of the towering trees and hushed stillness, I was blissfully unaware that true peace was a luxury about to be violently revoked. The first tremor in my newfound serenity happened while I was chopping firewood, preparing for the looming California winter chill. Back at the cabin, ready to split the logs, I found my axe coated in something unnatural. It was a thick black goo, viscous and clanging, like tar mixed with something metallic. It resembled blood, but darker, far stickier, with an unsettling odor I couldn't quite place. A jolt of unease went through me. I scrubbed the axe clean, the strange substance resisting the water. Promising myself I'd investigate later, a promise I somehow knew I wouldn't keep. Days drifted by, deceptively normal. Then, during one of my porch swing chats with Elise Zimmerman, my neighbor from further down the mountain road, the unease resurfaced. Elise, a bubbly, if slightly eccentric, park ranger, had become my first and only friend in the area. We'd swap stories, her wild tales of mountain wildlife, my slightly embellished boasts of city success. One afternoon, amidst our laughter, she mentioned local rumors, whispers of odd sounds in the woods at night. Could be a new species, Stefan. Something the Park Service hasn't catalogued yet. She'd joked, eyes sparkling, seemingly oblivious to the knot tightening in my stomach. Elise's words, though light-hearted, burrowed into my mind. Every rustle of leaves outside my cabin windows, every snap of a twig, became amplified, laced with a prickling dread. The next morning, the local diner buzzed with hushed, morbid gossip. Rangers had found mutilated wildlife deep in the park. Deer foxes, even a bear cub, their bodies horrifically mangled, not by any animal attack anyone recognized. The whispers soon morphed into a chilling reality. A few days later, hiking with Elise on a trail near my property, we stumbled upon a scene that froze the blood in our veins. Human remains, scattered across the forest floor, amidst the ferns and fallen redwood needles. Panic seized us, a cold wave washing over our faces. My heart hammered against my ribs. I have to call this in, Elise stammered, hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. No signal, of course, no signal. We decided to hike back to my cabin, hoping the slightly higher elevation might catch a bar. Fear gnawed at us, a silent, shared terror as we hurried through the woods, desperate to report the gruesome discovery. Moving too fast, anxiety blurring my vision, Elise tripped on a gnarled root, a sharp cry escaping her lips. She went down hard. Just twisted my ankle, I think, she groaned, wincing as she tried to stand. Go on, Stefan, get to your cabin, call it in. I'll catch up, just need a minute. Against my better judgment, I hesitated, then nodded, guilt already twisting in my gut. I plunged onward, the woods darkening with the approaching twilight. Shadows stretched and danced, mocking my growing fear. I burst through my cabin door, adrenaline surging, and frantically dialed 911. My voice trembled as I recounted the horror, begging for help. The dispatcher listened intently, her voice calm but serious. Officers were already en route, she explained. News of similar incidents had reached them from other parts of the park. Stay inside, she instructed. Lock doors and windows, await their arrival. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock echoing in the suffocating silence of the cabin. My gaze darted between the inky blackness beyond the windows and the illuminated clock face. Finally, a knock. Relief flooded me. I yanked open the door, ready to see flashing lights and uniformed officers. Instead, a nightmare stood on my porch. A creature. It towered, vaguely humanoid, but twisted into something utterly grotesque. Limbs contorted at unnatural angles, skin like stretched tar over a skeletal frame, thick veins pulsing beneath. Its face was a sickening mockery of human features, elongated, distorted, nostrils flaring with each rasping, poisonous breath. But the eyes were the abyss. Deep, empty voids, devoid of any light, any soul, staring into mine, whispering silent horrors from some ancient, forgotten darkness. My stomach clenched, bile rising in my throat. Pure, primal terror seized me, hijacking my senses. In that instant, I completely forgot Elise. A fresh wave of icy dread washed over me as the creature shuffled closer, methodically, relentlessly, forcing me to stumble backward into the cabin. Instinct took over. Staying inside was suicide. I had to find Elise. Survival, for both of us, was outside, in the woods, not trapped in this flimsy cabin. As the abomination took another step, reaching a tar-like hand towards me, I spun around and bolted for the back door. Somehow, I dodged its grasping fingers, adrenaline propelling me into a sprint. Elise, I screamed, my voice cracking, desperate for a response. Every few strides, I risked a glance back. It was following unnervingly fast for something so ungainly, but just slow enough for me to maintain a precarious distance. Then, through the trees, I heard a faint cry, Elise's voice. I veered towards it, crashing through undergrowth. I found her limping towards me, face streaked with tears, ankles swollen and purple. She'd heard my shouts, but her fall had left her too injured to do more than whisper my name. As we stumbled together, hope flickered. A dirt road, barely more than a track, appeared at the edge of the woods. It wasn't much, but it was a path away from this nightmare. We hobbled down the narrow track, leaning on each other for support, every muscle screaming in protest. I was winded from my frantic escape. Elise's leg was clearly worsening with every step. Our eyes darted back and forth, scanning the trees, searching for any sign of our pursuer. The creature was relentless, hunting us with a cold, inhuman determination, fueled by a malice I couldn't comprehend. It closed the distance with terrifying speed. There was no fight left in us, no room for reason. As it lunged, it went straight for Elise. Without warning, it struck, claws ripping into her abdomen. Blood erupted, spraying crimson against the darkening trees. Elise's scream tore through the silence, a sound that will forever haunt my nightmares. Terror and desperation warred within me. Help was too far, too late. I had to do something. Frantically, I scanned our surroundings for anything that could be a weapon. Then, Providence. Headlights cut through the trees, a truck rounding the bend in the dirt road. Waving my arms, yelling like a madman, I tried to flag it down. Glancing back, I saw the creature sink its claws deeper, tearing flesh. The truck screeched to a halt. A man leaped out, grabbing something heavy and metallic from the truck bed. A crowbar. He charged towards the creature, swinging with brutal force. With an unearthly screech, our attacker recoiled from Elise, its black, soulless eyes fixing on the newcomer, rage radiating off it in waves. It reared back, talons raised, ready to retaliate. It pounced, but the man was faster. He lunged forward, the crowbar connecting with a sickening crunch. The creature staggered, momentarily incapacitated. Adrenaline surged again. We scrambled, Elise and I, into the truck bed, the man jumping in after us, slamming the door. The tires spun, spitting gravel as he floored it, tearing us away from that abominable place. Elise didn't make it. The wounds were too deep, too savage. Days blurred into weeks after her death, a haze of grief and disbelief. Part of it was the physical trauma, but the park ranger who rescued us, Officer Keller, said it was more than just physical wounds. He said the thing inflicted something else, something deeper, a psychological trauma that just consumed her. Officer Keller, the man who'd saved us, was the officer dispatched after my frantic 911 call. For now, the creature remains hidden in the redwood depths, a terrifying embodiment of otherworldly horror that defies explanation. Maybe, someday, someone will find a way to vanquish it. But until then, people will keep whispering stories in hushed tones, shuddering at the dark tales of a malevolent force preying on the unsuspecting somewhere deep within nature's shadows. My name is Alex Ryder, and until recently, life was peaceful. I lived in a snug cabin nestled deep within the redwood forests of Northern California. Days were simple, hiking through towering trees, fishing in the nearby creek, and relishing the quiet away from city chaos. A few close friends in the nearby town would visit for friendly banter, card games, and hearty, home-cooked meals. One afternoon, the ring of my phone shattered the tranquility. It was my friend Ben, his voice tight with panic. "Alex, you have to see this," he stammered, words tumbling out. He insisted I come to his place immediately. Arriving at Ben's, I found him pale and trembling. He led me to his computer, where a horrifying video played from a local online forum. It showed a group of backpackers brutally attacked by something animalistic. The video cut out abruptly, leaving a chilling silence. "What is that thing?" I asked, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Ben's voice was barely a whisper, filled with genuine terror. "I don't know, man. Never seen anything like it." We stared at each other, speechless, until Ben pointed out the video's location, disturbingly close to us, to our usual hiking trails. That night, our usual group of friends gathered. Everyone had seen the footage, and panic was simmering in our small community. As we debated what to do, a frantic knock echoed through the cabin. It was Sarah, another friend, her face etched with terror. Gasping for breath, she recounted stumbling upon a gruesome scene on her way home. 2 bodies near the trailhead, the same area from the video. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as we exchanged horrified glances, a chilling certainty settling upon us. Something terrible was lurking in our sanctuary. Everything changed after that. Our welcoming, beautiful woods became a place of nightmares. Fear was a tangible presence. Every strange sound, every rustle of leaves, made us wonder if that monstrous thing was watching, stalking. We decided to stay indoors at night, to be cautious, but still, people vanished in broad daylight. Local news issued constant warnings against going out alone. Hysteria took hold as more bodies were discovered. The creature from the video became infamous, a monster with no name, no known origin. Its form defied description, a grotesque mix of flesh, fur, and tentacles, radiating pure malevolence. With each new mutilation, each disappearance, whispers grew of its insatiable hunger for blood. Panic reached fever pitch. I decided we couldn't wait to be attacked. Action was needed. My friends and I organized nightly watches over the town, armed with firearms from the local police. We were determined to stand against this evil, even as doubt gnawed at us. Was this creature real, or some shared nightmare taking shape? Crouched on a rooftop one night, rifle in hand, I heard shuffling footsteps approaching from the darkness below. The sound grew louder, closer. My heart hammered against my ribs as I peered over the edge, praying for dawn. Then I saw it. Creeping along Maple Street was the horrifying visage of our tormentor, bloodshot eyes searching, seeking its next victim. I raised my rifle, aimed, but hesitated. The inhuman monstrosity momentarily stole my resolve. I steadied my grip, focused on the sight, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the night. The creature stumbled, wounded, but not down. I knew I couldn't face it alone. Radioing my friends stationed across town, I spoke quickly. "Guys, I found it. It's here, Maple Street. I hit it, but it's still moving. We need to work together, bring this thing down." "We're coming," came a reply, voice tight with fear and determination. Minutes later, my friends arrived with several police officers. We surrounded the creature, now snarling and fighting its pain. We all fired at once, bullets tearing into its unnatural form. A gut-wrenching screech ripped from its maw as it collapsed onto the pavement, still twitching. Adrenaline coursing through us, we cautiously approached the fallen beast, unsure if it was truly dead. Suddenly, it convulsed, pushing itself back onto twisted limbs. Malevolence burned in its bloodshot eyes as it locked onto our terrified faces. No time to think, no time to waste more bullets on what seemed unstoppable. We scrambled back to our vehicles and sped away from that abomination. Later that night, we met at a safe house, trying to figure out our next move. None of us were experts in this paranormal folklore. We were out of our depth. We had no choice but to call for professional help. We contacted animal control experts specializing in dangerous and unusual animals. We'd hesitated before, fear making us believe this was beyond them. Now, we needed every resource possible to end this nightmare. The experts arrived, bringing specialized equipment designed to capture dangerous creatures alive with minimal harm. They listened to our story, surveyed the attack sites, taking in every detail. Working alongside law enforcement and these professionals, we became a well-organized unit, determined to track down this seemingly invincible monster. By a stroke of luck, following a trail of blood from its wounds, we found it hidden deep in the woods. It growled, a sound of insatiable hunger and violence, but this time we were ready. The animal control team expertly deployed their specialized tools, finally capturing and restraining the monster in a custom-built cage. We stood there, watching the horrifying creature snarl from behind bars. It was surreal to think our town could finally begin to heal from the terror it had unleashed. In the aftermath, we mourned our lost neighbors and friends. A sense of unease lingered. The faces of those taken would haunt us, unanswered questions about the creature's origins and motives forever present. Authorities transported the captured monster to a secure facility far from our town. My friends and I clasped hands, a strange mix of relief and despair binding us together, forever marked by this ordeal, hoping for brighter days. Slowly, the town began to heal. Life would never be quite the same, but one thing was certain. Together, we had faced unimaginable horror and survived. My name is Alex, and there's something about living in a secluded cabin deep in the Redwood National Park that forges a strange kind of friendship with silence. This peculiar bond became really clear after I moved into the Lost Creek area, finding a weird kind of peace in the rustling leaves of the ancient redwoods and the constant hush of nature's symphony. A few months back, I got a call from my old college buddy, Ben. He was planning a trip out west and thought it would be cool to crash at my place for a weekend and catch up after all these years. Stoked for his visit, I went into overdrive, making sure the cabin was guest ready. I even decided to clear out some of the overgrown trails around my property. While I was working on the Hemlock Trail, I stumbled upon something totally out of place, sticking right out of the dirt. A bone, a human bone. Just seeing that single piece sent a shiver of unease down my spine. But it was just one bone, right? Could have been anything, maybe an old animal burial ground or something. Trying to shake off the weird feeling, I told myself it was nothing and kept working. Ben rolled up the following Friday evening and we spent the night like we were back in college, swapping stories and laughing until late. But he's always been perceptive, and he picked up on my slightly on-edge vibe pretty quickly. He nudged me, wanting to know what was bugging me. Being the good friend I am, I told him about finding the human bone out on the trails. Little did we know, sharing that piece of information would turn out to be a massive mistake. The next morning, fueled by bad coffee and a nervous energy, we decided to hike deeper into the woods. We were determined to find some kind of rational explanation for my discovery to put our minds at ease. Sunlight filtered in crazy patterns through the towering redwood canopy as we walked, the forest floor dappled with light and shadow. It was beautiful, but there was this undercurrent of tension now. Hours went by, and as dusk started to creep in, painting the landscape in long shadows, we stumbled upon something else that made our blood run cold. Several redwood trees, giants that had stood for centuries, were scarred. Massive gouges, like claw marks, ripped deep into their thick bark in this chaotic, frantic pattern. It didn't look like any animal damage either of us had ever seen. These new signs of devastation, I guess you could call it, really started to mess with our heads. Anxiety began to spike. The wind picked up, whistling through the high branches, sounding almost like a mournful cry. Apprehension tightened its grip on my chest. Ben and I exchanged a look. He suggested we head back to the cabin, get back to safety before total darkness swallowed the woods. As uneasy as we both were, it felt like the only smart move, so we turned and started trekking back towards home. Then, it hit us. This overwhelming, gag-inducing stench of decay slammed into our nostrils. Tense and seriously alarmed now, we pushed on, trying to pinpoint the source, and then we saw it. Not too far off the trail, in a small clearing, a grotesque creature was hunched over something. Lifeless. It was massive, covered in thick, matted dark fur. Its limbs were way too long, ending in these wickedly sharp claws that were sunk into whatever it was feeding on. As if it sensed us, the creature slowly lifted its head, and that's when I saw its face. It wasn't a face. It was this gaping maw, filled with rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth, like something out of a nightmare. It let out this low, guttural growl that vibrated right through us. But the worst part, its eyes, or what should have been eyes, just black pits, bottomless black pools, completely empty, devoid of anything human, anything. Understanding? Ben, bless his quick thinking, grabbed a thick fallen branch nearby, holding it out in front of us like some kind of pathetic shield. I fumbled for my phone, desperately trying to get a signal to call for help. Nothing, no bars, no signal in this godforsaken wilderness. The creature's growling intensified, each sound a promise of violence. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely even swipe at the screen. We were completely cut off, trapped in this forested purgatory. As the creature shuffled towards us, Ben and I knew we were screwed. A branch was going to do jack against that. We locked eyes, a silent, terrified conversation passing between us. Then we just turned and ran. We sprinted back into the forest, desperate to put as much distance as possible between us and that monstrous thing. Our boots pounded against the packed earth trail, the sound echoing through the once peaceful woods. It wasn't long before we heard it, the heavy, rhythmic thud of massive limbs chasing after us. Our hearts hammered against our ribs, adrenaline surging as we pushed our legs to their absolute limit, trying to outrun this living nightmare. But the deeper we ran, the more disoriented we became. We'd been hiking all day, and now, in the fading light, our sense of direction was completely gone. No phone, no signal, no logic, no reason to explain what was hunting us. Just raw, primal terror. We kept running, blindly hoping to somehow stumble back onto a familiar trail, a path back to the cabin, to safety. Then, a piercing scream ripped through the trees, cutting through the sounds of our panicked flight. I risked a glance back, just in time to see Ben trip over a gnarled tree root, his body crashing to the ground with a sickening thud and a cry of pain that tore at my soul. I hesitated, just for a split second, my mind screaming at me to stop, to help him. But then I realized, there was no way I could save him. Not from that. Panic exploded inside me, raw and overwhelming. Heartbroken, I kept running. I ran for my life, the sound of Ben's screams fading behind me, swallowed by the growing darkness of the forest. I ran until my legs finally gave out, collapsing onto the cold, damp forest floor, exhausted, defeated. Using the last sliver of moonlight filtering through the dense canopy, I staggered back to my feet. I started to retrace our earlier route, desperately scanning the trees, hoping, praying to find those distinctive markings, those clawed trees, to guide me home. It took hours, agonizing hours of stumbling through the darkness, fueled by nothing but fear and a desperate hope. But then, finally, I saw it. The first redwood, scarred and gouged, the claw tree we'd discovered that morning. A surge of something like hope, something like determination, flooded through me. I kept going, following our trail back, each clawed tree a beacon in the darkness. Finally, I stumbled through the cabin door, collapsing onto the floor, utterly spent. Not just physically exhausted, but emotionally shattered, grief-stricken. Ben was gone. My friend, my confidant, someone who shared my love of nature and adventure, gone. Overwhelmed with sorrow and a desperate need for help, I grabbed my phone again, and this time, there was a signal. Weak, but there. With shaking hands, I hastily dialed the number for the nearest ranger station, gasping out a broken, frantic account of what had happened. The operator on the line listened, her voice calm and professional, promising to send help immediately. With a heavy heart, I locked every door and window, barricading myself inside the cabin, waiting, every creak of the wood, every rustle of leaves outside, threatening to send me spiraling into panic. I fell into a fitful, uneasy sleep on the floor. The image of those black, empty eyes burned into my mind. The next days were a blur of flashing lights and official faces. Local authorities swarmed the woods around my cabin, searching, attempting to locate Ben's remains. They were tight-lipped, sharing almost nothing with me. Despite my frantic attempts to explain about the creature, the monstrous thing we'd encountered, they just didn't believe me. They kept mentioning a bear, suggesting that bear activity could explain the unusual disturbance. In their search for answers, they found nothing. No trace of Ben, no sign of the creature. He was just gone. Another victim lost in the treacherous wilderness. Another unexplained tragedy. As time crawled by, I tried to piece together some kind of normal life back in my secluded cabin. But I couldn't shake it. Couldn't shake the memory of that gruesome day. Couldn't forget a single detail of that monstrous creature. Every time I ventured back into the woods, alone or with others who came seeking answers about Ben, there was this constant, gnawing unease, like we were being watched, always being watched, from the deep shadows, by something dark and utterly sinister. I lost Ben to a brutal, senseless fate, and with him, a part of my own soul felt like it had been ripped away. But I'm determined to honor his memory, by researching, documenting, and trying to protect others from the horrors that I now know are real, that lurk just beyond the edge of our understanding. Ben will not be forgotten, and I will make sure his life and his tragic end will have some kind of meaning. It was a whim, really, quitting city life to become a writer in a secluded cabin. The Black Forest in Germany seemed like the perfect escape. Solitude, I thought, was the key to unlocking my creative genius. Famous last words, right? Turns out, glorious foolishness is a fantastic teacher of character, and mine was about to get a crash course. To push myself, to feel useful in this isolated community, I joined the local Bergwacht, the mountain rescue team. My first month was a blur of wilderness safety drills, poring over topographical maps until they swam before my eyes, and team meetings fueled by local beer where we swapped slightly exaggerated tales. Repetitive, sure, but those skills would soon become terrifyingly real. One evening, mid-meeting, the emergency phone shrieked. Panic flared through the room. All hands on deck. Someone was lost, screaming for help somewhere deep in the woods. The call was garbled, desperate, painting a grim picture. Hearts hammered against ribs, fear and adrenaline, a cocktail I was quickly learning to recognize. We tore towards the location, sirens wailing, arriving at a scene that stole the air from my lungs. There, crumpled at the base of a towering pine, was a body. Limbs twisted at angles that screamed wrong, motionless. What in God's name? I choked out, crouching beside the figure. My stomach lurched. Klaus, our grizzled veteran, just shook his head, his face grim. Never seen anything like it, Elias. But we move now, every second counts. No argument there. Hesitation was a luxury we couldn't afford. We worked with grim efficiency, carefully lifting the barely human shape onto a stretcher, hauling it back towards the waiting ambulance, the forest floor a treacherous obstacle course under our boots. Sleep was a distant memory that night. Klaus's words from the debrief echoed in my head. Something attacked them. Brutal. No. Remorse. But what? No animal, no person I could imagine could inflict such devastation. Weeks crawled by. Seeking a different kind of solitude, I hiked alone near my cabin, pushing deeper into the woods than usual. That's when I found it. A mound, not of leaves, not of earth. Bones, piled high, unnaturally white against the dark soil. Definitely not a natural decay process. Definitely not a predator's leftovers. These remains, they radiated malice, twisted, broken, arranged. Nausea slammed into me. A cold shiver, deeper than the mountain air, snaked down my spine. I knew, with a sickening certainty, I shouldn't be there. Shouldn't have seen that. But the image was burned into my brain. I needed answers. What had done this? Who, or what, was capable of such unspeakable violence? The Bergwacht was my only lifeline in this wilderness. Back at our next meeting, the beer tasted like ash. I told them about the bone pile, the chilling link to the rescue call weeks ago. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Then, a grim nod from Klaus. We formed a small investigation team, law enforcement joining our grim party. We plunged back into those cursed woods. No one spoke. The air itself felt wrong, heavy with dread. We all knew, deep down, we were walking into something profoundly dangerous. And then we saw it. A nightmare given flesh. The creature responsible for the carnage. Part animal, part monster. Jaws lined with teeth like serrated knives. Eyes that were black pits, so deep and dark they seemed to swallow light itself. It stood tall, impossibly so, on muscular hind legs that bent at unnatural angles, like a monstrous grasshopper. Long arms ended in claws, not paws, claws like butcher's hooks, dripping. Something. It sensed us, and then it screamed, a sound that ripped through the forest. A bone-chilling screech that felt like amplified fingernails dragged down a chalkboard, vibrating in your teeth, your skull. It fixed those black eyes on us, and in that moment, we knew we were prey. All hell broke loose. Chaos erupted. We scattered, instinct overriding training. I bolted, legs pumping, heart a frantic drum against my ribs. My service pistol, suddenly pathetic in my hand, felt like a child's toy. Elias, it's coming after us. Greta's voice, crackling through the walkie-talkie, laced with pure terror. We need backup. Backup, a laughless sound in the face of this. None of us were equipped for this. I fumbled with the walkie-talkie, adrenaline making my hands clumsy. Anyone Bergwacht, police, respond. Static, only static. The monstrous thing was still coming, tearing through the undergrowth, leaving a trail of splintered trees and ripped earth. One by one, they fell. My comrades, my team. Greta was first. Mauled, tossed aside like a broken doll. Then Hans, his scream cut short, a sickening crunch echoing through the trees as the beast's jaws closed around his head. I ran, blindly, gasping for air, praying for a miracle, for anyone to answer my desperate pleas. Silence, just the monstrous pursuit behind me. I stumbled, crashing into a small clearing. Dead end, too late. The horrifying creature burst into the opening, a triumphant roar ripping from its throat. I raised my pistol, finger frozen on the trigger. Useless. I knew it was useless. Then, a sound. A worry, growing louder. A police helicopter, appearing as if summoned from the sky. The deafening roar of the rotors, the blinding spotlight, slammed into the clearing, disorienting the beast, giving me a sliver of hope. A voice boomed from the helicopter's loudspeaker, ordering me to move. I didn't hesitate. A rope ladder snaked down. I scrambled for it, climbing with a desperation born of pure terror. As I clawed my way upwards, law enforcement opened fire from above. Bullets rained down. At first, nothing. The creature seemed to shrug them off. Then, sustained fire, round after round. Something shifted. The monstrous animal faltered, weakened. Finally, with a shuddering crash, it collapsed onto the forest floor. Safe, pulled into the helicopter, surrounded by armed officers, I looked down at the creature, gunshots finally taking their toll. Relief washed over me, so potent it was almost a physical force. Then, darkness. My body gave out. I woke up in a sterile white hospital room, days later. Disoriented, aching, but alive. Law enforcement debriefed me, their faces grim. The creature, they explained, was a critically mutated apex predator. An anomaly, born from illegal genetic experimentation in a hidden lab nearby. Details, gruesome, disturbing. This abomination was never meant to exist. But what haunted me, what clawed at my soul, were Greta, Hans, Klaus, my fallen comrades, their only crime. Being in the wrong place, at the wrong time. They wouldn't go home. Heavy guilt settled on my shoulders, the weight of survival when they hadn't. After the hospital, I went to their funerals, paid my respects to shattered families. It couldn't bring them back, couldn't erase the vivid, horrifying images, but it was a duty, a way to honor their bravery in the face of something utterly unnatural. The lab, they said, was shut down. Those responsible, facing consequences. I knew I could never set foot in those woods again, but I wouldn't abandon the Bergwacht. My fallen teammates would be a part of me, always, motivating me to help others, to never forget the rewards and the unspeakable tragedies of that fateful day we faced the beast in the Black Forest. They say if you could bottle peace, it would smell like pine needles and damp earth. That's the closest I can get to describing the serenity that swallowed my life whole in that little cabin, tucked away in the Redwood National Park. My name's Ethan Hayes, and trust me, city life in San Francisco was all I knew. Concrete, sirens, the constant digital hum, that was my soundtrack. Never in a million years did I imagine trading that for this. But one wrong turn on a hiking trail, and bam, there it was, my escape. It was perfect, honestly. Nature raw and unfiltered, no dress code, no rush hour, just the ancient redwoods standing sentinel. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually breathe. The catch, humanity, was a solid trek away. Nearest town, Crescent City, was a good hour's drive. Not exactly Postmates territory when you're craving a decent burger, but peace, solitude, worth every mile of isolation. That bubble of tranquility held until Liam and Chloe decided to rough it for a weekend. Liam, my old college buddy, now a hotshot lawyer with a penchant for designer hiking boots. Chloe, his wife of 5 years, a social media influencer who, bless her heart, thought roughing it meant no Wi-Fi for a few hours. Saturday afternoon, Liam, ever the outdoorsy type in theory, suggested a nature walk for Chloe's Instagram. We wandered deeper into the woods than I usually bothered with, snapping pics of ferns and ridiculously tall trees. Then I saw it. Something that screamed wrong. A door. Just a plain, solid, metal door. Standing flush against a redwood. No frame, no building, just door. In the middle of nowhere. Whoa, what the heck? Chloe's perfectly manicured nails pointed at the anomaly. Think it's like a secret bunker. Liam, ever the pragmatist, scoffed. Probably just some park service thing. Storage shed for tools or something. He tried to sound nonchalant, but even he was staring. I couldn't shake the feeling. I'd hiked these trails countless times, never seen anything like it. It was like a glitch in the Matrix, a misplaced pixel in the natural world. That night, we were grilling hot dogs and cracking open cold ones around the fire pit, when the forest decided to chime in. Not with the usual crickets or owl hoots. This was different. A sound that clawed its way up your spine. A shriek, raw and guttural, ripping through the quiet. We froze, hot dogs halfway to our mouths. Coyotes, sure, we'd heard them. Deer rustling, standard forest soundtrack. This was agony. Pure, unfiltered pain echoing through the trees. Pizza deliveries running late. Liam managed, his voice tight, a nervous laugh that didn't quite land. Chloe, bless her influencer heart, tried for composure. Probably just an injured animal. Nature, you know, brutal. Brutal was an understatement. We stayed glued to the firelight long after the flames died down, the forest holding its breath around us. Morning didn't bring relief. I woke up feeling like I'd wrestled a bear in my sleep. Liam, who'd decided to embrace his inner Unsell Adams and capture the dawn, came stumbling back, face white. "Guys," he croaked, voice shaky. "You need to see this." His dawn photography had apparently led him to a discovery. Mutilated wildlife, scattered just beyond the cabin clearing. Birds ripped apart, a deer carcass. It was a bloodbath painted against a sunrise. Chloe, bless her delicate sensibilities, promptly excused herself to process inside. Liam, despite looking green, grabbed his fancy camera, muttering about documenting nature, and headed back into the woods. Me, I just stared at the carnage, the smell of pine and blood mixing in the morning air. I reluctantly started rebuilding the fire, the crackling wood a small comfort against the creeping dread. Then Liam came crashing out of the trees. Not strolling, crashing. He was covered in dirt, face streaked with something dark, eyes wide and wild. Panic choked his words. "Ethan, Chloe, thing. In there," he gasped, pointing back into the trees. Before we could even blink, before we could process thing, it happened. A shadow detached itself from the tree line. It moved like nothing natural, a grotesque parody of movement. Limbs too long, body hunched, a snarl that ripped through the air, primal and terrifying. It was like something stitched together from nightmares, man and beast twisted into something wrong. The ground vibrated as it charged Liam. Instinct took over. Chloe, surprisingly, was the first to react. She snatched up a rock, a decent-sized chunk of granite from the fire pit, and hurled it with surprising force. It connected with the creature's face with a sickening thud. The thing stumbled, fury flashing in its bloodshot eyes. That split second bought me time. I grabbed a burning log, embers spitting, and swung it like a goddamn baseball bat. The creature's eyes locked on mine, abandoning Liam, shifting its focus to the new threat. Adrenaline flooded my system. I swung again, the burning wood connecting with its face, snout. Whatever that hideous mess was, it howled, a sound that tore at your sanity, recoiling from the searing heat. Escape, that was the only thought. Liam, miraculously still moving, Chloe, pale but functional. We bolted, sprinting for the cabin, the creature's enraged roars echoing behind us. I brought up the rear, backing away slowly, log held like a pathetic weapon until Chloe and Liam were inside. I slammed the cabin door, fumbling with the flimsy lock. Inside, Liam was a mess, slumped against the wall, whimpering. Chloe, surprisingly calm now, was already tearing strips from a clean shirt, examining his wounds. Deep gashes across his chest, bleeding freely. Hospital, she stated, voice flat, professional. No kidding, I muttered, peering through the cabin windows, the creature's enraged cries still circling us. Chloe nodded, handing me her phone. Call 911. Now, we are not surviving another round with that. My fingers fumbled on the keypad, adrenaline making my hands clumsy. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, hi, we're in a cabin in the woods. Look, it's going to sound crazy, but there's some kind of animalistic creature attacking us. The operator's voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the skepticism. She kept asking for our location, for details that felt absurd in the face of that. But she promised help was coming, swiftly, right. We barricaded the windows with furniture, grabbed anything remotely weapon-like, a fireplace poker, a heavy cast-iron skillet, and huddled together. Chloe, surprisingly practical, cleaned Liam's wounds, applying pressure, trying to stem the bleeding. The creature was still out there, pacing, growling, a predator denied its kill. Fear hung thick in the air, suffocating. Car, Liam mumbled, through gritted teeth. Gotta get to the car. Chloe and I exchanged glances. Suicidal. The thing was waiting. Maybe it'll leave, I offered weakly, knowing it was a lie. We were trapped. Hours crawled by, each tick of the cabin clock an eternity. Exhaustion settled in, heavy and bone deep. The creature had gone quiet. False hope flickered. Maybe it had given up, ... Then the door exploded inwards. Not a slow creak, not a splintering crack. Exploded, wood ripped, hinges tore, the flimsy cabin door flying across the room. And then it was there, faster, more furious than before. It launched itself at Liam, a blur of teeth and claws. No time to react, no time to scream, just tearing. Liam's screams, raw and agonizing, filled the cabin, cut short with a sickening wet crunch. Terror, pure, white-hot terror. Chloe and I scrambled for the back door, a desperate, animalistic flight for survival. We burst into the night, sprinting blind into the redwoods, the creature's monstrous roars echoing in our ears. Then, a sound that wasn't a roar. Gunfire, bright flashes through the trees. Figures in tactical gear, emerging from the darkness. Help. Finally, we dove for cover as the responders, weapons blazing, engaged the thing. It was over quickly. Gunshots, roars, then silence. The responders, grim-faced, ushered us towards safety, away from the cabin, away from the horror. Liam was gone, just like that. Our weekend getaway started with laughter, ended in blood and screams. We mourned Liam, the lawyer who thought hiking boots were for fashion, not survival. We mourned the peace we'd lost, the terror we'd found, and we knew, with a chilling certainty, that we'd never forget the redwood cabin, the door in the woods, or the creature that waited in the dark. Some solitude, it turned out, comes at a hell of a price. My name is Ricardo Silva, and for the last few months, I've been holed up in a creaky old cabin at the edge of the Sierra Gorda Mountains in Mexico. The woods here always felt serene, but with an undercurrent of solitude that made it both my escape and my prison. My only real source of entertainment was an ancient radio I'd found, a relic that spun out random songs, dictating the soundtrack to my days. This morning was different. The dew on the grass was unusually heavy, and an unsettling silence had clamped down on the dense forest. To shake off this creeping unease, I decided on a long hike. I laced up my worn hiking boots, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and set off into the woods, no destination in mind. Hours melted away as I walked deeper into the trees, and then I saw it. A bizarre sight that made my breath catch in my throat. It looked like some kind of ancient ritual site. Dark robes were scattered all over the ground, discarded like molted skin. A shiver ran down my spine as I took in the scene. Dread, cold and heavy, settled in my gut. Hesitantly, I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of strange symbols etched into the earth around this eerie discovery. The tension was building inside me, a tightening coil of fear. I turned to head back to the cabin. That's when I noticed them. Peculiar footprints around the ritual site. They were wrong, malformed, with claw-like impressions, too bizarre to belong to any animal I knew. Despite their strangeness, something told me not to linger on this new mystery. I needed to get out of here. Shaking off the grip of fear, I quickened my pace. Daylight was starting to bleed into twilight, and unlike other evenings in these woods, every step felt heavier, every turn conjuring fresh dread. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Something just felt off. As if on cue, the evening sky ripped apart with frightening, high-pitched screeches. Tearing and gnashing sounds followed, echoing through the trees. Panic seized me. I darted behind a massive oak, my heart pounding in my ears as the disturbing noises drew closer. Peering from my hiding spot, I saw it. A horrifying creature, something that defied logic, defied description. It was bipedal, towering at least 8 feet tall, with long, gaunt arms ending in savage claws. Its skin was a mottled grey, tough as old leather, adorned with patches of coarse fur that jutted out along its spine. But its face, that was the stuff of nightmares. A twisted fusion of animals, part bear, part dog, with too many teeth crammed into a muzzle locked in a grotesque snarl. Dried blood, I assumed, caked parts of its face and claws. In one claw, it clutched something that could only be the mangled remains of someone less fortunate. Tearing hungrily at the body as viscera dripped onto the forest floor. Paralyzed by absolute terror, I struggled to slow my ragged breathing, to remain hidden from this unimaginable enigma. Escape was the only thought screaming in my mind. But then, the creature stopped devouring its prey. It sniffed the air, its head slowly turning in my direction. Our eyes locked for an eternal second. Even in my abject horror, I didn't dare move, didn't dare blink. The creature held my gaze, menacing and still, as if taunting me to challenge it. Forcing every ounce of courage I possessed into action, I grabbed a rock nearby and hurled it away from us, into the woods. In that split second, when the creature's attention flickered towards the sound, I broke our staring contest and ran. I ran deeper into the woods, adrenaline surging through me, terror lending wings to my feet. The sounds of chaos erupted behind me, snapping branches, guttural growls, chasing me, pushing me deeper into what felt like hell's domain. The creature was gaining. Its sickening laughter mingled with my panicked breaths, with the frantic pounding of my heart. A new resolve hardened within me. I wouldn't let this foul thing consume me without a fight. Drawing my hunting knife from its sheath, I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. The sky above was a bruised purple, spitting streaks of rain that mingled with sweat and fear on my face. The shadowy figure loomed closer. I knew this might be my only chance, life or certain death. As I prepared to face the monstrous beast, my desperate mind raced for any means of defense. An idea, desperate and flimsy as it was, struck me. I spotted a tree branch overhead. Without hesitation, I threw my hunting knife upwards. It wedged into the wood, temporarily out of reach. The creature snarled at this strange move, but continued its advance. No time to waste. I stumbled forward through the forest, frantically searching for help. Running, I called out, my voice cracking, for anyone who could hear me. I hadn't seen another soul in these woods before the creature attacked, but now, more than ever, I needed someone else. Suddenly, through the trees ahead, another person appeared. A woman. She glanced over at the sound of my desperate cries, her eyes meeting my panicked gaze. As she registered the horror chasing me, something in her expression shifted, understanding dawning. "Over here, run towards me," she yelled. My legs pumped, driving me through the thick foliage as I sprinted towards her. The creature's presence growing closer, heavier. Abruptly, she darted off to her right and vanished from view. Confused but desperate not to lose her in these hellish woods, I made a quick turn. Sacrificing speed for agility, navigating through narrower passages between trees. I burst into a small clearing. She stood there, confidently, next to an improvised trap. Branches covered in torn fabric, soaked with something that reeked of gasoline. "What do we do?" I gasped, catching my breath. "Wait until it's on top of the branches," she yelled back, her voice barely audible over the increasing volume of footsteps and snarls. We didn't need to wait long. Seconds later, the monstrous creature lunged into the clearing with such force it launched layers of loose dirt and vegetation into the air. It landed momentarily on all fours before rapidly regaining its upright stance, its eyes fixed on us, its prey. Once the creature was fully on the branches, the woman struck a match against a nearby rock and flung it at the monster. In an instant, the gasoline-soaked rags ignited into an inferno beneath the abomination, engulfing it in flames. Its roar of pain was deafening, a distorted symphony of angry snarls and guttural screeches. But with each passing moment, its once powerful form began to weaken as it succumbed to the torture of the flames. The woman grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me away from the gruesome sight. We sprinted deeper into the woods, whose darkness now seemed almost welcoming, less threatening than what we were leaving behind. We didn't stop running until the echoes of our pursuer dissolved into the silence behind us. Catching our breath, I tried to express my gratitude, tears stinging my eyes. "Thank you," I choked out. "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't there." She looked deep into my eyes, searching for something. After a brief pause, she nodded solemnly and said, "We're in this together now." We spent days traversing that godforsaken place together, relying on each other for survival amidst whatever else lingered in those woods. Wordlessly, we mourned those who hadn't escaped the creature's grasp and vowed to never forget their tragic fates. In time, we found ourselves treading familiar ground as civilization re-emerged from our once hellish purgatory. Life slowly returned to normal, though neither of us would ever be the same again, forever haunted by the terror that had so brutally shaken our reality. As our paths diverged, and our connection faded over time. I frequently find myself looking back at her kind but determined eyes that first day in the clearing. Two strangers, bound together in an incomprehensible nightmare. It was then that I fully understood. It wasn't just the creature that had hunted me, but also our shared human will to survive that had tracked us down, refusing to let go. And somehow, we managed to emerge victorious. The biting cold woke me before dawn, a sudden, sharp chill that seemed to seep right through the log walls of the cabin. My name's Alex Ramsey, and I'd come to this isolated spot in the Montana wilderness to escape the wreckage of my life back in Chicago, a particularly nasty divorce that had left me raw and wanting only silence. I threw back the heavy quilts and scrambled to get the fire roaring again, my breath misting in the frigid air. Outside, snow was falling thick and fast, turning the world into a monochrome landscape. Being a city guy, born and raised, the idea of a few weeks in a remote cabin had sounded idyllic, almost romantic. Reality, as it often does, was proving to be a lot less charming. The first few days were uneventful, just the quiet crunch of snow and the whisper of wind in the pines. Then, one evening, I met a couple named Ben and Sarah Walker, who lived a few miles down the logging road with their big, goofy Labrador, Duke. They stopped by to welcome me, friendly enough, but they also dropped a strange warning. Something about the area having its oddities, which they waved off as just local folklore. I didn't think much of it at the time. Later that same day, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to explore the woods behind the cabin. I pushed deeper than I had before, the snow muffling every sound. That's when I found it. A scene that slammed the air from my lungs and froze the blood in my veins. It was a massacre. At least 5 bodies, human bodies, lay scattered in the snow, a sickening tableau of red against white. They were ripped apart, throats savagely torn open. My first thought was wolves, but the sheer violence, the carnage, felt way beyond any animal attack I could imagine. Shaken to my core, a cold dread settling deep in my bones, I stumbled back to the cabin. I needed to call someone, the authorities, anyone. Cell service was a joke out here, swallowed by the mountains, but thankfully, Ben had given me a frequency for the local ranger station, just in case. Trying to keep my voice steady, fighting the trimmer in my hands, I keyed the radio and reported what I'd found. A voice on the other end, calm and professional, promised help was on its way. "Stay put. Stay safe," they'd said. Easy for them to say. Hours crawled by, just as dusk started to bleed into the landscape. Ben and Sarah showed up again, this time with an invitation to dinner. "Don't want you spending another night alone out here," Ben said, his eyes a little too bright. Not with things being what they are. Reluctant to be alone. The image of those bodies still burned behind my eyelids. I accepted. We ate in strained silence, the weight of the woods pressing in on us. We made weak attempts at conversation, nervous jokes that fell flat in the heavy air. Then, Duke, who'd been dozing by the fireplace, suddenly whined, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest. He was staring at the sliding glass doors that led to the backyard, hackles raised. Ben got up to see what was spooking his usually placid dog. He barely had the door cracked when it happened. A monstrous shape hurled itself out of the darkness, a blur of twisted limbs and shadow. It slammed against the door, missing Ben by inches. Duke erupted, barking like a thing possessed. lunging forward to defend his master. The creature was enormous, easily twice the size of a man, maybe more. Its skin looked wrong, stretched and scarred, like tattered leather. A wave of pure, primal panic washed over me. Adrenaline spiked, and we all reacted without thinking. Sarah, surprisingly quick, yanked a shotgun from behind the sofa, shoving it into Ben's hands. She snatched a hunting knife from a drawer in the kitchen, her face pale but set. Feeling useless, my mind racing, I figured I could at least be a lookout. I frantically scanned the windows, the darkness beyond the glass seeming to writhe with unseen threats. Suddenly, Duke yelped, a high, sharp cry of pain. He scrambled back, whimpering, his front leg twisted at a sickening angle, blood blooming in the snow-white fur. Ben, his face grim, started firing the shotgun. Blast after blast ripped through the cabin, the roar deafening, but the creature, it didn't even flinch. My blood turned to ice. It was like shooting at a brick wall. Indestructible. The nightmare was unfolding, surreal and horrifying. Ben kept firing, emptying the shotgun again and again into the thing, while Sarah, knife in hand, moved towards it with a terrifying kind of courage. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and a strange, twisted admiration for their bravery. Sarah's knife flashed, connecting with the creature's flank, but it seemed more like an annoyance than an actual attack. The thing roared, a sound that wasn't animal, not quite, more like a guttural, grinding wrongness. It turned its full fury on Ben. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, stumbling towards the phone on the wall. I punched in 911, my fingers clumsy and numb. The creature lunged again, faster this time, and Ben, weapon empty, stumbled back. Duke, wounded and whimpering, could only watch. The situation was spiraling, turning truly, desperately grim. On the phone, a calm voice answered, assured me help was coming, told me to stay safe. Stay safe. Looking at Sarah and Ben, their faces etched with terror and determination. Knowing Ben was out of ammo, Sarah's knife useless, I knew we couldn't hold out much longer. We retreated, scrambling back down the hallway, slamming into a spare bedroom, Ben shoving the flimsy door shut and fumbling with the lock. We shoved a heavy dresser in front of it, a pathetic barricade against whatever was on the other side. Duke lay whimpering in the corner, his injured leg trembling. Desperate, grasping at straws, I remembered something Ben had mentioned earlier about a guy he knew. Some kind of wildlife expert, a tracker. I dug through my pockets for the scrap of paper with the ranger station frequency. Found another number scribbled on the back. It was a long shot, our only shot. I dialed, my hand shaking so badly I almost missed the numbers. Then, blessedly, finally the sound of sirens, faint at first, then growing louder, closer. A flurry of shouts, heavy footsteps pounding outside. The door to the cabin exploded inward, splintering wood flying. Authorities, figures in dark uniforms, weapons raised, stormed in. The roar of gunfire filled the small cabin, echoing off the log walls, rapid, relentless. And then, silence. When it was over, when the echoes faded, the creature lay sprawled in the snow, just outside the shattered doorway. A grotesque heap of fur and muscle, finally still, lifeless. Ben and Sarah shaking, tearful, embraced, relief flooding their faces. Duke, limping badly, wagged his tail weakly, nudging against Ben's leg. Later, when the wildlife expert arrived, examining the fallen creature with a grim professionalism, he gave us the explanation. It wasn't a monster. not in the fairy tale sense. It was a bear, he said, a grizzly, but twisted, mutated. Exposure to some kind of contaminant deep in the wilderness. Something leaching into the soil and water had warped it, twisted its familiar form into that horrifying shape. That explained its unnatural strength, its seeming invulnerability. Without expertise, without heavy firepower, we wouldn't have stood a chance. With hearts full of gratitude, we watched our rescuers depart, the red and blue lights of their vehicles disappearing down the snowy track. We were left in the quiet aftermath, the cabin feeling suddenly empty, the air still thick with the residue of terror. Ben knelt beside Duke, stroking his fur, his voice thick with emotion. Their bond, forged in the crucible of that night, was palpable, unbreakable. In the days that followed, I did what I could to help Ben, Sarah, and Duke piece things back together. We cleaned up the cabin, scrubbing away the blood and splintered wood, trying to erase the physical scars of the attack. But the emotional ones, those would take longer. Time moved on, seasons changed, but we stayed connected, a small, unlikely trio bound by shared trauma. We leaned on each other, found solace in understanding, in not being alone in the long twilight between terror and closure. Years later, back in the noise and chaos of the city, I still tell this story sometimes, around campfires, at quiet gatherings. It's a story about fear, yes, but more than that. It's about the strength found in desperation, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of unimaginable horror. Duke, brave, loyal Duke, is gone now, but his memory remains, a testament to courage and love in the darkest of times. Ben and Sarah, they found their own kind of peace too, turning their trauma into something positive, starting a support group for others, haunted by similar nightmares, helping them face the monsters that had moved from the woods outside to the landscapes of their minds. We were changed, scarred, but not broken. We learned a hard lesson in those dark woods, that facing adversity together, seeking help when you need it, is not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. And that lesson, etched in fear and survival, continues to shape our lives, long after the snow has melted and the echoes of gunfire have faded. It was just about to be lights out, teeth brushed, the usual nightly checklist complete. I'm Ethan Blackwood, by the way, and history's always been my jam. Colonial life, especially spent the last 3 weeks holed up in this main cabin, knee deep in research. Early settler stories, they've always gotten to me. Being out here, it was like stepping right into America's past. The cabin was perfect, tucked away in the trees. The branches whispered secrets as they rubbed together in the wind. Quiet, peaceful, really. Moments like these, I'd always laugh at those city folks dropping crazy money on peace and tranquility retreats. All you need is a quick escape to the woods. One day out near Baxter State Park, digging around for info on some old settler, native skirmish, I found it. A skull, weird-looking thing, half buried in the leaves. I was too hyped about the find to really clock how off it looked. Long stretched, out eye sockets. Canines way too sharp. Didn't know what I'd actually stumbled on. Just knew I had to bring it back to the cabin. That's when things started to get wrong. Dusty footprints showed up one evening, leading from my front door, disappearing into the woods. Another morning, my clothes were yanked out of my suitcase, scattered all over the cabin floor. like some kind of psycho fashion show. Trying to play it cool, I started taking evening walks in the woods. Figured if I forced myself to be out there, these weird vibes would just fade. One night, moon slicing through the trees, throwing these creepy shadows all over the trail, I heard it, rustling behind me. Heavy breathing, like something big was struggling to move. Before I could even think straight, panic slammed into me. Rational thought, gone. Just pure terror. Adrenaline shot through my veins, and I bolted into the woods, straight into the dark, thinking I was running towards safety. Lost in the trees, stumbling around, that's when I saw it. Something I'll never unsee. Hidden deep in the woods, a skeletal creature hunched over what was left of someone. Frozen solid, I watched it. Red eyes, burning right through me. Razor claws, dripping red. Rows of teeth, too many, and it looked like it was smiling. Slowly, it licked blood off its face, then grinned at me again, this knowing wicked nod. Next morning, fueled by straight-up paranoia, I bought a shotgun at the local store. No way was I going to be hunted, eaten, whatever, by that thing. Liam, an old buddy from childhood, joined me back at the cabin. Not to calm me down, maybe just to get a piece of the crazy. Evening came, fire crackling on the porch. Liam, staring into the flames, goes all casual. These woods breed stories, man. You might have just pissed off something that's been here longer than any of us. Nervous laugh. Didn't do much for my nerves, which were already fried. Later, way too much whiskey in us, trying to numb the fear, and maybe pump up Liam's adventure, junkie side. We were out there again. A walk of terror, Liam called it. Our bravery was already cracking as the wind picked up, whipping through the forest, turning the trees into this swirling orchestra of creepy noises. Then, it was like time just stopped. Eerie stillness dropped over us. We both admitted it, quiet, scared this was a terrible idea. Suddenly, behind us, heavy breaths. Distinct. Close, bodies instantly tensed, ready to bolt. We turned horror. Real, in-your-face horror. The creature towered over us, contempt dripping off it. Felt like our souls were under attack, just by being near it. Saliva, thick and nasty, dripped onto the ground. Hissing, killing the plants right there. That skull I'd found looked like baby teeth compared to this thing's mouth. Jaws stretched way too wide on its freaky, stretched out head. Liam and I locked eyes. Terror, we didn't speak. Any sound, we knew, would just set it off. The beast moved closer. Massive, clawed paws crushing everything under them, leaving a trail of dead leaves and broken branches. Time to move. No warning, we just sprinted. Away from it. Towards anywhere but there. Safety in numbers, right? Creature snarled, angry, and took off after us. Speed I couldn't believe. Panic surged. Instinct took over. Just run. My brain was racing, trying to find a way out. Help. That's what we needed. 9/11, I yelled at Liam, still running. Branches whipping at my face. Liam fumbled for his phone, hands shaking like crazy. Hard to do anything at that speed, in the dark. Trying not to look back, listening for the heavy breaths, the ground crunching closer. It was gaining. Finally, Liam got through. Dispatcher on the line, voice calm, saying help was coming. Relief for a second. Then, reality hit again. Still running for our lives. Adrenaline pumping, we hauled it towards a cave we'd seen earlier, hoping to hide out until the cops showed up. Scared out of our minds, we squeezed deep inside, trying to vanish into the blackness. Minutes crawled by, felt like hours. huddled together, waiting terrified. Then, a growl, earth-shattering, cave walls shook, sound ripped through us. It had found us. Guttural growl echoed around us. Then, those red eyes, burning in the dark, locked onto ours, predatory, enjoyment in them. I jumped, grabbing Liam's arm. Sirens, faint at first, then louder, closer, red and blue lights flashing at the cave mouth. Footsteps fast, coming our way. The creature went nuts, twisted body shaking with rage. Cops got closer. Beast snarled, defiant, then just vanished. Into the deep dark of the cave, left behind the stink of sulfur and scorched stone where its feet had been. Cops rushed us out of there, faces grim. They'd seen it too, seen it run. Shaken, we joined them, walked away from those woods. Liam and I looked at each other. Lives changed forever. News spread, whispers at first, then louder. Other people. Same woods, same stories, monsters. But days turned into weeks. The encounters faded. Life went back to almost normal. Away from those cursed trees. Liam and I, we still talk about it sometimes. About what we lost chasing some thrill. Life goes on. But you don't forget. Not those teeth, grinning. That knowing nod. Like it knew it would see us again. Liam and I made a pact that night. Stay grounded. Don't go digging where you shouldn't. What happened in those woods that night, it's burned into us. We'll never go back, never again. The humid air hung heavy as I sat on the porch of my secluded cabin, nestled deep in the Redwood National Park. Sunlight dappled through the towering trees, casting long shadows across the weathered wood of the porch. My name is Alex Ryder, and I lead a life that most would call unremarkable. This cabin, a relic from my late grandfather, was my escape, a place to sift through memories and the dust of time. This weekend, I was doing just that, sorting through boxes of his belongings. While rummaging through a box labeled Grandpa's Gear, an old, faded photograph surfaced. It was a Polaroid, capturing a younger version of myself, grinning ear to ear, proudly holding up a trout almost as long as my arm. A wave of pure nostalgia washed over me, a bittersweet ache for simpler days. Find anything interesting? A voice boomed from the cabin doorway. It was my cousin Ben. Just ghosts, I replied, tossing him the Polaroid. He caught it with a chuckle, a familiar sound that echoed our shared history. We fell into reminiscing, trading stories of childhood escapades in these very woods, until the sharp shriek of tires on gravel cut through the quiet. We both turned towards the overgrown track leading to the cabin. A dusty Jeep Cherokee lurched into view, carrying our friends, Sarah and Mark. The evening dissolved into laughter and shared memories around a crackling fire pit. We joked about past mishaps, the kind that only long-time friends can truly appreciate. As dusk deepened, the conversation drifted to local folklore. Tales whispered around campfires in these woods for generations. Stories that felt both fantastical and strangely rooted in this place. Remember the legend of Jedediah Blackwood? Mark asked, poking at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the twilight. The laughter died down, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as we all knew where this was going. The guy who vanished without a trace back in '98. Sarah chimed in, her brow furrowed with a hint of unease. Yeah, Ben added. But his voice trailed off, a reluctance to delve into the darker aspects of Jedediah's fate hanging in the air. The firelight danced on our faces, casting flickering, elongated shadows that mimicked grotesque figures among the ancient redwoods. A prickle of unease settled over me, a sense of something unseen lurking just beyond the fire's glow. It was a cold dread that seeped deeper than the evening chill. The easy camaraderie of our reunion had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, unspoken tension. Finally, Sarah broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard some hikers in town talking. They said they saw something near Blackwood Creek the night he disappeared. Something unnatural, like an animal, but twisted." A shiver, colder than any night air, ran down my spine. Just then, a sharp snap echoed from the darkness beyond the ring of firelight. We all froze, breath held, straining to hear above the rustling leaves and crackling flames. Then, a low growl resonated through the trees, bouncing off the dense redwood trunks, sending my pulse hammering in my ears. It wasn't like any animal sound I knew. It was primal, guttural, something ripped from the pages of a nightmare. "Run!" Sarah screamed, the word barely audible above the rising tide of chilling growls that seemed to be closing in. It wasn't a joke. Before anyone could move, a hulking shape crashed through the undergrowth. It was immense, a creature of impossible angles and unnatural hues, limbs too long, skin too pale. Its maw opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, saliva like black tar dripping onto the forest floor as it fixed its gaze on us, a predatory hunger burning in its eyes. Words failed us. Shock had turned our limbs to lead, but primal instinct took over. We scrambled back from the fire, chairs flying, a desperate scramble towards the cabin door. We fumbled with the latch, shoving each other in our panic, slamming the heavy wooden door shut against the monstrous thing that pursued us. We tumbled inside, a heap of tangled limbs and terror. I gasped for air, heart hammering against my ribs, and looked around. Sarah's face was ashen. Ben's hands trembled visibly. Mark was frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. Protective instinct surged, adrenaline flooding my veins. "Lock the door," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Everyone, grab something to defend ourselves." Our ragtag group tore through the cabin, desperation fueling our search for anything that could serve as a weapon against the horror lurking outside. The growling and scratching against the cabin walls intensified. We were trapped, preparing for a last stand against the unknown terror. The Polaroid, with its innocent image of childhood joy, felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Panic and adrenaline coursed through us as we huddled together, listening to the creature's screeches echoing through the woods, a sound that clawed at our sanity. Ben snatched a baseball bat from a corner, Sarah armed herself with a fireplace poker, and I grabbed a heavy hunting knife I found tucked beside an old camping pack. "Why haven't we called for help?" I choked out, my voice trembling. "No signal out here," Sarah whispered back, her voice thick with terror. We were utterly alone, facing something beyond comprehension, something relentless in its hunger. Suddenly, the cabin shuddered violently as the beast slammed its massive body against the wall. The force was brutal, pictures ripped from the walls, glass shattered on the floor. "We need to get out of here," I yelled, and my friends nodded frantically in agreement. As we desperately scanned for an escape, the creature continued its assault. Floorboards groaned under its weight, each impact threatening to splinter the sturdy structure. Our frantic search led us to a hidden trapdoor beneath a dusty rug in the corner of the main room. Without a second thought, we hived it open and plunged down into the darkness below. Ben, miraculously, had found a flashlight, and its beam cut through the pitch blackness, revealing a stone cellar, damp and cold. I risked one last glance upwards before pulling the trapdoor shut above us. Our only hope was this hidden space, a fragile sanctuary until what? Until someone, somewhere, realized we were in mortal danger. The echoing growls from above vibrated through the cellar walls, sending shivers down our spines. We huddled together in silence, waiting, listening, dreading whatever fate the darkness held. Then, silence. The assault from above ceased. We exchanged nervous glances, afraid to speak, terrified the creature was merely toying with us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Hours crawled by in the suffocating blackness of the cellar. Our eyes, strained against the feeble beam of the flashlight, constantly scanning the edges of the light, searching for what? Then, a sound, faint but unmistakable, cut through the oppressive silence, the distant wail of a siren, a police siren, growing steadily louder. Hope surged, a fragile spark in the overwhelming darkness. Cautiously, I pushed open the trapdoor, peering out into the moonlit forest. No sign of the monstrous thing that had terrorized us. Then, through the trees, figures emerged, police officers and park rangers, their powerful torches cutting through the night. "Help!" I yelled, relief flooding through me. We scrambled out of our hiding place, running towards the reassuring beams of light and the figures of authority. The relief on the faces of the officers was palpable. They explained they were already investigating reports of strange animal noises in the area and had heard the commotion at the cabin. After a rushed, disjointed account of our horrifying ordeal, they led us to their vehicles. Paramedics were waiting outside, tending to our scrapes and bruises, offering warm blankets and hushed reassurances. Sitting in the ambulance, wrapped in a thermal blanket, I looked at Sarah and Ben, a wave of gratitude washing over me. We had survived, but a heavy weight settled in my heart, a somber awareness of those who might have crossed paths with this creature before us, those who might not have been so fortunate. The night ended with a torrent of unanswered questions, but one thing was brutally clear. The creature had shattered our sense of sanctuary in a place that had always felt like a refuge from the world. We would never forget what we had seen. It would haunt us, a chilling undercurrent to every memory of the woods. Life went on after that night, but the innocence was gone. Whenever the reunion weekend was mentioned, a collective shudder ran through us, a glimpse of raw terror flickering behind eyes that were forever changed by an encounter ripped straight from the darkest corners of our nightmares. The silence of the redwood forest was supposed to be my sanctuary. My name is Marcus Silvanus, and I'm a programmer. City life in San Francisco had become a relentless grind. So when my aunt left me her secluded cabin nestled deep within these ancient woods of Northern California, it felt like a lifeline. Trading concrete canyons for towering trees, I envisioned finally finding peace. Stepping onto this isolated property, you'd think tranquility would be unavoidable. Boy, was I wrong. I soon found myself yearning for the distant sirens of the city compared to the dread that seeped into every corner of this wilderness. It started subtly. One sweltering afternoon, my phone vibrated with a message from Lucius Valerius, my neighbor down the logging road. Neighbor was generous. Lucius's place was still a solid mile away, but in these parts, that's practically next door. His text was terse, unsettling his cousin, Titus hadn't returned from a hike in the woods, and could I keep an eye out? A prickle of unease crawled up my spine, a premonition hanging heavy in the humid air. Sure thing, I texted back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I attempted to bury myself in code, lines of Python blurring on the screen. But the digital world couldn't drown out the gnawing feeling at the base of my skull. Finally, needing a break from the screen's glare, I went to the porch. From there, the forest edge was visible, a dark, impenetrable wall of green. I stood, scanning the tree line, trying to rationalize my growing anxiety. Everything appeared normal. Birds squawked unseen in the canopy. Leaves rustled in the languid breeze. Dappled sunlight filtered through the branches. Just as my unease began to recede, replaced by the nagging reminder of a looming project deadline, something in my peripheral vision snagged my attention. Tangled in a manzanita bush, where an overgrown deer trail vanished into the dense woods, was a flash of unnatural color, a half-shredded daypack. The sight jolted me, a cold fist clenching in my gut. Titus's backpack. Without thinking, I abandoned my water glass on the porch railing and hurried across the overgrown yard towards the disturbing discovery. Reaching the remnants of the pack, my pulse hammered against my ribs. With trembling hands, I freed it from the thorny branches. Jesus, I muttered, turning the tattered nylon in my hands. What the hell happened here? The air hung thick with unspoken possibilities, none of them good. Swallowing hard, I decided to text Lucius Valerius about my find, snapping a quick picture of the mangled pack to send. But before I could even type out the message, the ground shifted beneath my feet. A subtle tremor, barely perceptible at first. Then another, more pronounced, rolling through the earth. Nervously, I glanced around, trying to regain my balance, my breath catching in my throat. Then it came. A roar. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, nothing I'd ever heard, organic or mechanical. It ripped through the stillness of the woods, an ear-splitting bellow that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. My blood turned to ice. Fear, raw and primal, flooded my veins. What in God's name could make that sound? My fingers fumbled uselessly over my phone screen, terror seizing my motor skills. Tears stung my eyes. The roar echoed again, closer now, reverberating off the ancient trees, like a monstrous avalanche was bearing down on me. And then I saw it, lumbering through the trees, blotting out the dappled sunlight. A creature ripped straight from the pages of a nightmare. 15 feet tall, easy. Scales like polished obsidian shimmering in the fading light. Those eyes burned with a malevolent, predatory glow. Fragments of local legends. Whispered tales of things that dwelled in the deep woods. Flashed through my panicked brain. Creatures no human was ever meant to see and live. Despite its colossal size, it moved with an unnerving grace. Each step sent tremors through the ground, each movement a threat. Its massive tail, thick as a redwood trunk, dragged low, obliterating ferns and saplings in its wake. For a split second, our eyes locked. Those terrible, luminous eyes seared into my soul, igniting a wildfire of panic. Then, all hell broke loose. The monstrous thing charged. Its path was a swath of destruction, trees snapping like twigs, the forest floor churning under its immense weight. Paralyzed by sheer, unadulterated terror, I stood frozen, watching death hurtle towards me. It reached me in seconds. A swipe of a clawed hand, the size of a car hood, connected. The blow launched me through the air, a ragdoll tossed aside. I slammed into a redwood trunk with brutal force before collapsing in a heap at its base, the world spinning, pain exploding in my shoulder. Disoriented, gasping for air, I knew there was no time to process the shock. The ground vibrated with the creature's approach, its heavy footfalls closing in. Escape. Instinct screamed for survival. Scrambling to my feet, ignoring the white, hot agony in my shoulder, I sprinted away. Into the woods. Away from the roar that pursued me. Blindly, I crashed through undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes, lungs burning, legs screaming. I desperately scanned my surroundings, praying for any sign of Lucius Valerius, anyone who might have heard the unholy commotion and come to investigate. Nothing. Just trees. And the relentless crashing behind me. Summoning the last reserves of adrenaline, I burst from the claustrophobic woods into a small clearing. My vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. Keep moving. Then through the trees, I saw them headlights, bobbing and weaving through the forest road in the distance. Hope surged, desperate and raw. Waving my arms frantically, I stumbled towards the approaching lights. To my overwhelming relief, the vehicle slowed, then stopped. A beat-up Ford pickup. Lucius Valerius's truck. He must have gotten my garbled text. He'd come looking. What the hell is going on? Where did that come from? Lucius Valerius yelled, wrestling the passenger door open as I lurched towards the truck.
No idea!
Just drive. I gasped, scrambling into the cab, slamming the door shut. Without another word, Lucius Valerius floored it. The truck lurched forward, spitting gravel, tires fighting for traction. The monstrous roar echoed through the twilight woods, fading behind us as we sped away. We couldn't see it anymore, but we both knew, with chilling certainty, that the creature wasn't far behind. Our only chance was to reach town, to alert someone, anyone. Police, animal control. They would probably laugh us out of the station. But civilization, lights, other people, that had to be better than being alone in the woods with that. As we roared down the logging road towards town, I fumbled for my phone, hands still shaking, and dialed 911. I poured out the story, the backpack, the roar, the creature, the attack, the chase. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was a strained mix of shock and disbelief, but duty, bless them, prevailed. They promised to send deputies to the edge of town immediately. As we reached the outskirts of town, the familiar glow of streetlights a welcome beacon in the encroaching darkness, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror and saw nothing. The creature had stopped at the edge of the woods. It hadn't followed us into town. Why? How? It made no sense. Maybe it wouldn't venture into human territory. Or maybe something else was keeping it at bay. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Within minutes, county sheriff's cruisers converged on the town limits, lights flashing. Deputies looking bewildered but grimly determined, setting up a makeshift barricade at the forest edge. The creature was contained, for now. Prevented from rampaging into town, at least. But containment wasn't a solution. The questions hung heavy in the air, thick as the forest mist. How do you get rid of something like that? What had awakened it? Could there ever be any kind of peace between our small community and the nightmare now lurking just beyond the tree line? As dusk blurred into night, a tense meeting convened in the town hall. Lucius Valerius and I recounted our terrifying encounter, voices still trembling, hoping someone, anyone, had an idea. Cassius Venator, a grizzled hunter, who'd lived in these woods his entire life, finally spoke up. He proposed a hunting party, a group of skilled locals, armed and ready, to venture back into the woods and confront the beast head-on. The idea sounded insane, suicidal, against something that size, that aggressive, but no one had a better plan. That night, a morbid reality settled over us. The creature had already brought terror and bloodshed to our doorstep. We couldn't just leave it unchecked. Days bled into weeks. No easy answers emerged. No magical solution materialized. But one thing was starkly, irrevocably clear: our town would never be the same. Despite the gnawing fear, the sleepless nights haunted by obsidian scales and glowing eyes, we were bound together now, forged in the crucible of shared trauma. The memory of Titus, and anyone else foolish or brave enough to venture back into the woods to face the creature, would forever be etched in our collective memory. Their loss was the price we paid for trying to protect our homes, our families, our fragile peace. Fear still shadows our days, yes, but so does an unexpected, unbreakable spirit of solidarity. Together, we face the impossible challenge of living alongside a monster. Because in the end, it's our belief in each other, our stubborn refusal to surrender to despair, that keeps us going. That gives us a sliver of hope, however fragile, for a better tomorrow. The humid air hung heavy as I stepped out of my beat-up truck, the scent of pine thick in the air. Leaving the city behind for this secluded cabin in the heart of the Redwood National Park felt like shedding a skin. My name is Liam Tremblay, and I was chasing a ghost of peace I doubted I'd ever find again. The cabin owner, a gruff voice on the phone, had mentioned a rustic retreat by a misty lake. Rustic was an understatement. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the last century, but the isolation was exactly what I craved. The first few weeks were deceptively normal. I explored the dense woods, the towering redwoods casting long shadows, and even met a few locals in the small, isolated town nestled at the edge of the park. While unpacking, a yellowed newspaper clipping fell out of a box. Local mystery: 3 vanish from redwood trails. The headline screamed. A shiver traced my spine, but I tossed it aside. City friends' dark humor, probably. Then came the evenings with newfound acquaintances. We'd fire up the grill, the smell of grilling meat mingling with the damp forest air. One night, around a crackling fire, my neighbor, a burly guy named Jax Dubois, started a story with a booming laugh. "You won't believe this," he chuckled. But a bear broke into old Maggie's place and polished off a whole case of her cheap beer. We all laughed, the sound echoing in the stillness of the woods. Suddenly, a sound ripped through the laughter, a brutal crashing from the direction of the lake. Branches snapped, undergrowth crunched. "Probably just a deer," Jax said, though his voice lacked conviction. He clapped me on the shoulder, a forced reassurance. "Nothing to worry about, bot." Later, back in the cabin, the image of the dark lake and the violent sounds kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just the noise, it was a feeling, a prickling unease that settled deep in my bones. Something felt profoundly wrong. Driven by a gut feeling I couldn't ignore, I decided to walk down to the lake the next morning. Just a quick look, I told myself, but that decision, that simple walk, shattered my fragile peace and plunged me into a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. The morning air was thick with fog, tendrils of mist clinging to the redwood trunks, as I made my way towards the lake. Sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy, casting the woods in a perpetual twilight. The air hung still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Each step crunched on the forest floor, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence. As I neared the water's edge, the mist thinned, revealing a desolate scene. The lake was dark, reflecting the gloomy sky like a sheet of obsidian. The silence here was absolute, unnerving. Then I saw them, footprints. Not deer tracks, not bear. These were massive, distorted, pressed deep into the muddy bank. Each print was easily twice the size of my boot, vaguely human in shape, but wrong, twisted. Before I could process what I was seeing, the woods exploded. A monstrous shape erupted from the dense undergrowth, a hulking mass of muscle and shadow. It moved with unnatural speed, a blur of fur and elongated limbs barreling straight for me. I barely registered the grotesque, twisted features, just raw, animalistic terror. Instinct took over. I dove, throwing myself sideways, just as the creature slammed into the space where I'd been standing. The ground vibrated with the impact. Pain shot through my knee as I landed hard. Cursing, I scrambled back, adrenaline flooding my veins. My hunting knife felt pathetic in my hand as the thing turned, circling back. Its eyes, glowing with a predatory light, locked onto me. Panic choked me, but I yelled a raw, desperate cry for help that ripped through the morning stillness. "Jax! Help me!" From the woods behind me, shouts erupted. Jax and a few others, guns raised, burst into the clearing. Relief mixed with fresh terror as I saw their faces, pale and stricken in the dim light. This wasn't a bear. This was something else entirely. We stood shoulder to shoulder, a ragtag group armed with hunting rifles, facing a nightmare made flesh. The creature roared, a sound that wasn't animal, wasn't human, but something deeply, fundamentally wrong. It lunged again, inhuman strength tearing into the trees beside us. I saw it swipe at Michel, another neighbor from last night's barbecue, and the man was thrown back like a rag doll, a scream cut short. Desperate, my mind raced back to last night, to the barbecue. Raw steak. It was a stupid idea, a flicker of hope in the face of certain death. But I had nothing else. Grabbing the remaining slabs of raw meat from the grill nearby, I hurled them at the creature as it charged again. To our collective shock, it worked. The monster faltered, its glowing eyes fixating on the meat. It snatched the steak from the air, tearing into it with ravenous hunger, ignoring us for the first time. Back to the cabins, now. I yelled, and we didn't need telling twice. We scrambled back, adrenaline-fueled retreat. Leaving Mitchell behind, we didn't even have time to check if he was alive. Survival was the only thing that mattered now. We slammed cabin doors, fumbling with locks. The creature's guttural snarls echoing behind us as we barricaded ourselves against the unknown horror of the redwood woods. Panic turned to grim resolve as we huddled in my cabin, the flimsy walls suddenly feeling like paper. We shoved furniture against the doors and windows, the scraping sounds a pathetic attempt at security. Annette and Marie, two other neighbors who'd joined us last night, were pale and trembling, their eyes wide with terror. Jax, ever the pragmatist, started rationing supplies, canned goods, bottled water, anything we could find. "Radio's dead," Jax announced, slamming the useless device onto the table. "Cell service is gone too. We're cut off." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by ragged breaths. We were trapped, with no way to call for help, and a monster prowling outside. Jack's estimated rescue, if anyone even knew we were in trouble, was at least 48 hours away. 48 hours to survive against what? I peered through the boarded, up window, the twilight woods now cast in deep shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through me. We took turns watching, guns clutched tight, the metallic tang of fear thick in the air. Sleep was a forgotten luxury. Hours crawled by. The forest sounds, once peaceful, were now menacing whispers. Then, it came, a blood-curdling scream that tore through the night. It was Annette, from her cabin across the clearing. Annette! Marie shrieked, scrambling to her feet. We didn't hesitate. Adrenaline overriding fear, we burst out of my cabin, guns raised, and sprinted towards Annette's. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, an eerie, silver glow that painted long, distorted shadows. Annette's cabin door hung open, swaying gently in the night breeze. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as we cautiously entered. The scene inside was a slaughterhouse. Blood was everywhere, splattered across the walls, the floor, the overturned furniture. Limbs, unrecognizable, lay scattered like discarded toys. Annette was gone, just pieces of her remained. Pierre, her husband, lay beside her, his face frozen in a silent scream. Another neighbor, Chantal, was slumped against the wall, eyes wide and vacant, a gaping wound in her chest. The stench of blood and something else, something acrid and unnatural, filled the air. We stared in horrified silence, the reality of our situation crashing down on us with brutal force. This wasn't just a wild animal. This was a massacre. Staying was suicide. We have to go, I choked out, my voice trembling. No. Our escape was a blur of terror and adrenaline. We grabbed what weapons we could, stumbling out of the cabin into the oppressive darkness. The silence was deafening, amplifying every rustle, every imagined sound. We moved like ghosts, clinging to the shadows, hearts pounding in our chests, expecting the creature to erupt from the darkness at any moment. Just as the faint outline of the main park road appeared through the trees, a guttural growl shattered the silence. It was close. Too close. Emerging from the trees, it stood blocking the road, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The creature, larger, more grotesque in the darkness, its elongated limbs twitching, its posture radiating predatory hunger. Rescue was just across the road, but so was death. My mind screamed for a plan, any plan. Across the road, safety, maybe. Here, certain death. Remembering the lake, the raw meat, a desperate idea sparked, panic fueled. I grabbed a jagged rock from side and hurled it, with all my might, into the dense thicket to our left. The sound echoed in the night, a sharp crack followed by rustling leaves. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, the creature's massive head snapped towards the sound. Its guttural growl shifted direction, and with terrifying speed, it lumbered towards the thicket, crashing through the undergrowth. No, run, I yelled, and we didn't hesitate. We sprinted across the road, lungs burning, legs pumping, diving into the relative safety of the woods on the other side. Behind us, the creature roared in frustration, the sound shaking the ground. We didn't stop running. We plunged deeper into the woods, branches whipping at our faces, stumbling over roots and fallen logs. Fear was our only fuel, adrenaline our only guide. Jax and Marie were right behind me, their breaths ragged gasps in the darkness. Finally, exhaustion forced us to stop. We collapsed against a massive redwood, chests heaving, listening for any sign of pursuit. Silence. Only the sound of our own ragged breathing and the distant rustle of the wind in the trees. We had put some distance between us, but the woods felt vast, indifferent, offering no real comfort. As dawn painted the sky with streaks of grey and pale pink, we stumbled out of the dense forest and onto a dirt road. Ahead, nestled in a valley, a cluster of buildings, a town. Salvation. We reached the town, a collection of weary souls seeking help from faces etched with disbelief and skepticism. The local sheriff, a stout woman with tired eyes, listened to our frantic story, her expression unchanging. She promised to investigate, a promise that felt hollow, laced with doubt. We didn't stay. We couldn't. The Redwood National Park, once a sanctuary, was now a place of nightmares. We left that desolate lakeside behind. The image of blood-soaked cabins and glowing eyes burned into our minds. Days blurred into weeks. News trickled back. No evidence of any unusual animal activity. The sheriff reported, her voice flat over the phone. No signs of a struggle at the cabins. Just abandoned cabins. Life, as it always does, clawed its way back to the surface. But sleep offered no escape, only replays of elongated limbs and guttural growls. The faces of Annette, Pierre, Chantal, and Michel haunted my waking hours, their screams echoing in the silence of my new city apartment. The official reports called it a tragic accident, hikers lost in the woods. But we knew the truth. We knew what lurked in the shadows of the Redwood National Park, a horror beyond explanation, a gruesome secret buried deep within the ancient trees, and the chilling memory of our near death, the faces of the fallen, would forever remain a dark stain on our souls. My name is Esteban Cordoba, and I've always been a skeptic. Supernatural stuff, otherworldly creatures. Never bought into it. That was until I traded city noise for the deafening silence of a remote cabin deep in the Canadian Rockies. 2 years ago, I came to this isolated spot seeking peace, a simpler life. My property was vast, hundreds of acres of raw wilderness, with my cabin tucked away in the thickest part of the woods. Nearest neighbors, miles away, and that was perfect for me. Life was quiet, predictable, blessedly uneventful. Until it wasn't. It started one evening, just as I was hauling firewood back to the cabin. Something was off. A trail of dark, crimson liquid snaked from my cabin door and into the trees. My blood ran cold, but morbid curiosity pulled me forward. I had to see where it led. Cautiously, I followed the trail deeper into the woods. Then I saw them human footprints mixed with the blood. Distorted, like whoever made them was injured, struggling. The further I went, the stranger those prints became, almost unnatural. My pace quickened, nerves on edge. And then I almost tripped over it. The scene that unfolded in front of me was sickening. A body lay sprawled on the forest floor. Human remains, so brutally ripped apart, so mangled, it barely resembled anything human. Barely recognizable as something that had been alive just hours before. It was clear, even without saying it aloud, murder. In my peaceful sanctuary. Well, ain't this a sight? The voice cut through the silence, making my heart leap. A disheveled man stepped out from behind a thick pine, arms smeared with something dark, hair a mess. He eyed me with open curiosity. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice tight, snapping out of my shock. This guy could be dangerous too. "Name's Javier," he drawled, casual as could be, gesturing to the butchered corpse with a disturbing grin. Something wicked tore this poor sap apart. Wild animal attack. Maybe? My gut twisted with unease. Wild animals were brutal, sure, but not strategic. Not like this. And animals didn't leave a blood trail leading victims deeper into the woods. I'm not sure, I stammered, still reeling from the gruesome sight. Javier seemed to pick up on my discomfort, giving me a knowing nod. You best head home, friend. Things get real dangerous out here after dark. Javier's warning echoed in my head as I hurried back to my cabin, thoughts racing. The sky was dimming fast, and a sudden, irrational urgency gripped me, like the darkness itself was alive, hiding something sinister, waiting to strike. Back in the cabin, I slammed the door shut, shoving a heavy wooden beam across it for extra measure. Despite the comforting crackle of the wood stove, the warm glow of candlelight, a chill settled deep in my bones. It wasn't long before the silence shattered. Unsettling howls ripped through the forest, a chorus of them, blending with low, guttural growls that were too wrong to be just animals. Then came the knocking. Deliberate, rhythmic, tapping right outside my door. Adrenaline surged, cold dread washing over me. Mustering every ounce of courage, I grabbed my grandfather's old hunting rifle, its weight familiar and grounding in my trembling hands. I threw the door open. The air outside was shockingly cold, biting, making it hard to breathe, as if some unnatural cold had taken hold of the clearing. And then I saw it, the creature from the unnatural footprints. Tall, hunched over, its limbs elongated, covered in what looked like shadowy tendrils, like massive, piercing thorns. We locked eyes. It snarled, sinewy jaws glistening, a look of hungry anticipation in its gaze. Then it moved, lunging towards me, a living nightmare, made flesh. My heart hammered against my ribs. Hands shaking, I raised the rifle, finger hovering over the trigger. The creature was on me. Instinct took over. I fired. The rifle roared, bucking against my shoulder. The bullet slammed into its shoulder, and the creature shrieked, a sound that wasn't animal, wasn't human, just pure agony. It stumbled back, giving me a split-second opening. I didn't hesitate. I bolted. Out of the cabin, into the woods, desperate for help. I crashed into Javier's campsite, breathless, terrified. He saw it instantly. Something was terribly wrong. His eyes widened, taking in my frantic state. What happened? He demanded, grabbing my arms. There's something out there, I gasped, struggling for air. Tell long limbs, thorns, all over its body, not human, not animal. Maybe it was the raw fear in my voice. Maybe it was some kind of rough camaraderie we'd built in this wilderness. But Javier didn't question me. He grabbed his own hunting rifle, yelling for others nearby. Men came running, guns in hand, faces grim. We raced back towards my cabin, and as we got closer, a stench hit us. Thick and cloying, unlike anything I'd ever smelled. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. The air crackled with tension. We reached the edge of the clearing, and a scream tore through the night. Guttural, otherworldly. No doubt now. Something unknown, something monstrous, was out there. Javier took charge, leading us in a loose formation, surrounding my cabin, shouting, "Anyone else in there?" This had gone beyond anything we could have imagined. Confrontation was our only option. Cautiously, we approached the cabin door, rifles raised. Javier kicked it open with brutal force. The cabin was empty. No creature. But there were scratch marks gouged into the wooden floorboards, leading towards the woods behind the cabin. We had no choice. We had to follow those marks, stop whatever this thing was before it found another victim. We tracked the marks, moving as silently as possible. The woods felt different now, heavier, the air thick with dread. Breathing became labored, and the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Anxiety tightened its grip, our knuckles white on our rifle stocks. Then, without warning, it charged, bursting from the trees, slashing wildly with those long, thorny limbs. 2 of the men were caught in the attack, screams of pain and terror ripping through the night. Without hesitation, Javia and I opened fire, rounds tearing into the creature as the others scrambled to help the wounded men, blood blooming on their clothes. With a screech of pain and rage, the creature retreated back into the suffocating darkness of the forest. We were left with 2 wounded men, bleeding badly, and the terrifying reality of what we were facing. Pursuit was suicide. We carried our injured friends back to Javia's camp, getting them patched up as best we could. By morning, we had no choice but to call the authorities. They didn't believe us, not at first. But when they saw the wounded men, when they saw my cabin, the claw marks, the blood, they couldn't just dismiss it. After that night, no one ventured deep into those woods without a heavy guard and a loaded rifle. Some packed up and left, fear driving them away. Others stayed, clinging to prayer, hoping for protection from whatever lurked in the shadows. As for me, I can't look at my old cabin without that night flooding back, a cold dread settling in my stomach. I'll never go back inside. That night changed everything. We were different, my neighbors and I, bound together by something terrifying, something unspoken. The creature left more than just wounds. It left a dark stain on our lives, a haunting whisper that echoes in the silence. Never venture into these woods again, never. The second I crossed the threshold of the cabin, a primal alarm bell went off in my head. It wasn't just that Liam's decorating sense resembled a yard sale after a tornado, seriously, who unironically hangs dream catchers in a mountain cabin. But there was this vibe. Wrong. Suffocating. Like the air itself was thick and heavy, pressing down on me. A cold dread prickled my skin. See, perfect getaway, right? Liam beamed, dumping our backpacks like they were sacks of potatoes. Right, I said slowly, my eyes scanning the dimly lit, wood-paneled room. Cell service, did you check? I asked, pulling out my phone, hopefully 0 bars. Of course. Liam just chuckled, all smug. Nada. Zip. Cut off from the digital world. Just what the doctor ordered. He was way too enthusiastic about being unreachable. The first 48 hours in our secluded cabin, nestled deep in the Olympic National Forest, were actually pretty great. Exactly the digital detox we'd been craving after months of non-stop city life in Seattle. Hiking, cooking, actually talking to each other without a phone buzzing every 5 seconds. Bliss. Until it wasn't. It was twilight. That in-between time when shadows stretch long and the woods get that eerie quiet. Liam and I were curled up by the fire, mugs of steaming cider warming our hands, when bem, someone was hammering on the front door like the world was ending. Cider sloshed everywhere as we both leaped up, adrenaline spiking. I yanked the door open, and standing there, swaying on the porch, was Chloe Jensen, a local park ranger we'd chatted with in Port Angeles when we'd stocked up on supplies. "Help me," she gasped. Her voice ragged as she stumbled across the threshold and nearly collapsed. Her face was ashen, streaked with dirt and tears. Her ranger uniform was ripped, stained a gruesome red-brown. "Chloe, what happened?" Liam's voice was sharp with alarm as he caught her arm, steadying her. It's Officer Davis," she choked out, her breath hitching. "We were patrolling near the Ho River Trail. Something got him." Her words tumbled out, a horrifying jumble. She described a scene so brutal, so inhuman, it made my stomach churn just listening. Officer Davis, her partner. Torn apart by, she couldn't even name it. Something with claws like razors, and again, she fixated on the eyes. Eyes like a predator. She'd whispered, shuddering. She'd only escaped by running, blindly, desperately, until she'd stumbled upon our cabin lights. "You're safe now, Chloe," I said firmly, grabbing a blanket and wrapping it around her shaking shoulders. "Stay here. Rest. We'll figure this out." She just nodded, her eyes wide and haunted, sinking onto the couch like a puppet with cut strings. Calling for backup. Pointless. Still no signal. And the ranger station, who knew how far, deep in this wilderness. Dawn broke, cold and gray, filtering weakly through the cabin windows. After making Chloe as comfortable as possible, Liam and I knew we had to go to the Ho River Trail. We had to see for ourselves. Dumb idea, probably. But we couldn't just sit here, paralyzed by fear. What we found at the trail, it was like stepping into a nightmare. Officer Davis's body, I can't even describe it without feeling sick. It was violated, broken, like something had taken pure, savage joy in destroying him. Blood was everywhere, staining the moss, the ferns, the rocks by the riverbank. It wasn't just death, it was carnage. Something monstrous had been here. We didn't linger. We turned and ran, scrambling back to the cabin. The image seared into my brain. The air in the cabin felt different now, tainted. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy with menace. We were trapped. Trapped with a terrified woman, and something unspeakable lurking in the woods. We shoved furniture against the doors, nailed boards across the windows, pathetic gestures. Really, against whatever we were facing. Night fell, a thick, suffocating blackness that pressed against the cabin walls. Fear was a living thing in that room, coiling in my gut, tightening my chest. We took shifts on watch, every shadow seeming to wreathe, every snap of a twig outside sounding like a gunshot. The hours stretched, agonizingly slow, punctuated only by the mournful sigh of the wind in the trees. Then, it came. Around 2:30 a.m. I jerked awake, my senses screaming. Not a sound, not a movement, just wrongness. Then, a flicker of motion at the edge of the trees. Near the trail. My blood turned to ice. I strained my eyes, peering into the inky blackness beyond the cabin's weak lamplight. And there it was, a shape. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluid, unsettling grace that no human could possess. It stepped out of the shadows, and the weak light caught it, the creature. Gaunt, elongated limbs, skin stretched tight over bone, glistening with something. Blood. Saliva, both, and the eyes, those eyes. Burning coals in the darkness, fixed on the cabin, on us. Predator eyes. Liam. My voice was a strangled whisper, my hand clamped on his arm, shaking. "Look." He followed my gaze, his breath catching in his throat. He saw it. The color leached from his face, leaving him pale and clammy in the dim light. Terror, raw and visceral, flooded the cabin. We scrambled for weapons, anything, a rusty fire poker, a heavy cast iron pan, a carving knife from the kitchen. Pathetic, useless against that. We huddled together, Chloe trembling between us, in the center of the room, whispering frantic, useless plans, praying, mostly praying. The creature started to move. Slowly at first, deliberate, each footfall crunching on the forest floor, each sound echoing in the suffocating silence. Closer, closer, then it reached the porch. And the scratching started. Raking, tearing sounds as claws ripped at the wooden planks, digging into the cabin walls. Then a splintering crack as something heavy slammed against the door. Calling for help. A joke. We were on our own. Completely, terrifyingly alone. Chloe's voice, thin and reedy with fear, broke the silence. No signal, remember? No way to call anyone. She was right, trap. No escape. Except Liam, his eyes darting around the room, suddenly pointed to a dark corner near the fireplace. Cellar door, he mouthed, his voice barely audible above the escalating sounds of destruction at the front door. Hidden cellar door. He'd seen it. A small, almost invisible outline in the floorboards. Our last, desperate chance. Silently, frantically, Liam wrestled with the hidden latch. It creaked open, revealing a dark, gaping hole in the floor. Without a word, he gestured for Chloe to go first. Then me. We dropped into the blackness, the heavy wooden door clanging shut above us. The cellar was cold, damp, and smelled of earth and mildew. Pitch black. We huddled together, hearts hammering, listening to the sounds above us. Amplified now, distorted by the close, confined space. The scratching, the tearing, the thuds as the creature ripped apart the cabin, piece by piece. Its rage was building, escalating, a terrifying crescendo of destruction. Then Liam, ever resourceful, whispered, "Wall weak spot." He'd found it in the darkness, his fingers tracing a section of crumbling stone in the cellar wall. Working together, using our makeshift weapons as tools, we chipped away at the loose stones, widening a crack, then a hole. Dust and dirt rained down on us as we clawed and scraped, desperate to break through. Finally, blessedly, a sliver of moonlight. Then, a hole just big enough. "Go," Liam hissed, pushing Chloe forward. Quickly, quietly. One by one, we squeezed through the opening, tumbling out into the cold night air, collapsing behind a thicket of bushes just beyond the cabin's foundation. Hidden in the shadows, our breaths held tight in our chests, we listened. The creature was still inside, thrashing, roaring its frustration. Then, a sound that made my blood run cold, a long, drawn-out howl, echoing through the trees, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and hunger. It had broken through. It was loose. Liam, his mind racing, grabbed a handful of pebbles from the dirt. "Distraction," he whispered again. "Get ready to run. Now." He flung the pebbles as far as he could, in the opposite direction of where we were hiding. The creature reacted instantly. Another enraged howl, closer this time, and then the sound of it crashing through the undergrowth. Charging away from the cabin, towards the thrown pebbles, our chance. "Run," Liam hissed, shoving us forward, and we ran. Like hell was on our heels, because it was. Sprinting blindly through the woods, branches whipping at our faces, lungs burning, legs screaming. Not daring to look back. But we could hear it, the creature's heavy footfalls pounding behind us, closer, closer. It had realized the trick. It was hunting us. Adrenaline surged, a desperate, primal fight for survival. We burst out of the trees and into a small clearing. And there, Like a mirage in the moonlight, sat an old, beat-up pickup truck half swallowed by weeds. "The truck," Liam yelled, his voice hoarse.
Hotwire it. Now.
I was useless with cars. Don't know how. Then Chloe, her face pale but determined, stepped forward. I might," she said, her voice stronger now. "My dad, he used to work on cars." A flicker of hope in the darkness. We piled into the truck, fumbling in the dim moonlight, Chloe's fingers flying. Working with wires and cables she somehow found under the dashboard. The creature was closer now. We could hear its snarls, its heavy breathing, just beyond the trees. Panic clawed at my throat. Then, a miracle. The engine coughed, choked, and with a deafening roar, sputtered to life. Just as the creature broke through the trees, leaping, it slammed onto the hood of the truck with bone, jarring force. Its monstrous face pressed against the windshield, inches from my face. Those eyes, burning with a hunger that chilled me to the core. Liam didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal, and with a screech of tires, we plowed straight into the thick trunk of a redwood tree. Shunch. The impact was brutal. The creature shrieked, a sound that ripped through the night, and was thrown from the hood, collapsing onto the ground with a sickening thud, injured, disoriented, but not dead, not yet. It scrabbled to its feet, trying to rise, to chase us again, but stumbled, fell back down. We didn't wait to see what happened next. Liam threw the truck into reverse, spun the wheel, and we roared out of the clearing, back down the rutted dirt road, leaving the creature and the cabin behind. We didn't stop driving until we saw the lights of Port Angeles, the blessed sight of other people, other cars. Civilization. We didn't speak for hours, just drove, numb and shaking, away from the woods, away from the nightmare. We made a silent pact, right then and there, never to talk about what happened in that cabin. Never to relive the terror. Days later, park authorities, investigating Chloe's frantic report, found Officer Davis's remains near the Hoh River Trail and the wreckage of our cabin. Signs of a violent struggle everywhere. They officially closed off sections of the park, blaming the deaths on a wild animal attack, some kind of rogue bear or mountain lion. Wild animal. Yeah, right. But the image of that creature's face, pressed against the windshield, those burning eyes, that will never leave me. Countless sleepless nights stretch ahead for Liam, Chloe, and me. We're bound together now, by something horrific, something we can't explain, can't even really understand. We survived, barely, and we know, with a bone-deep certainty, that some monsters aren't just stories. They're real. They live in the darkness, and sometimes they hunt. We mourn for Officer Davis, a good person, a park ranger, just doing his job, who stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. And in our hearts, we hold on to each other, a silent promise to stay connected, to be there, always, for the others who know the truth. We faced the darkness, and together somehow we made it out, alive, but forever changed. My name is Alex Ramsey, and I'm an engineer by trade. Recently, I felt the need to escape the relentless city grind. So I rented a cabin nestled deep in the redwood forests of Northern California. I figured a few months of solitude amidst these towering trees would do wonders for my frazzled mind. It's not every day you get to witness nature's raw, unfiltered moments, like when a family of raccoons decides your trash can isn't all you can eat buffet for the local wildlife. For the first few weeks, tranquility reigned supreme. Days melted into each other, filled with peaceful hikes, lazy fishing trips in the nearby creek, and evenings spent lost in books by the crackling fireplace. There was even this one weird, almost unsettling moment early on, when I stumbled upon what looked like animal bones half buried in the reddish soil just beyond the cabin's property line. Ancient relics of some prehistoric beast. Maybe. I'm no paleontologist, and frankly, it was a bit too eerie to dwell on. Then came that evening. After dinner, I decided to take a longer walk than usual. The sky was ablaze with this incredible mix of fiery orange and deep purple, nature's own masterpiece, and more than enough motivation to venture deeper into the woods. As I walked further, the long shadows of the redwoods swallowed the light, and my thoughts started to wander, bouncing from one trivial thing to another. Did I remember to lock the cabin door? Do squirrels ever get bored? How long has it actually been since I last trimmed this beard? My mind was drifting further into the realm of the absurd when a distinct sound pierced through the forest quiet. It was like a choked cry, echoing from somewhere in the distance. I wanted to dismiss it as just some animal in distress, but there was something undeniably human, like about the quality of the sound. Hesitantly, I started moving towards it, gripping a thick fallen branch I'd picked up for a little extra reassurance. Cautiously, I reached a small clearing. Tall grass swayed in the gentle breeze, and the fading twilight painted everything in shades of gray and deepening blue. And then I saw him, a man, slumped on the ground just ahead, writhing slightly. "Help," he gasped, the word catching in his throat like he was choking on it. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I took in the scene. He was covered in blood. This wasn't some hiking mishap or a clumsy fall. Something violent had happened here. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, I edged closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I needed to help this guy. As I reached out to him, trying to get a better look, to understand what was keeping him pinned to the ground, the unthinkable happened. This thing lunged from the shadows above. It was grotesque, something ripped straight from a nightmare. Gnarled, decaying claws slashed through the air, and it moved with a speed that was almost paralyzing as it snatched the injured man. Shock slammed into me, cold and brutal. My mind desperately scrambled for reason, for any kind of explanation, but there was none. I just stumbled backward, retreating from the raw terror unfolding before my eyes. The creature's twisted shape, those beady, black eyes that seemed to bore right through you. The rows of razor-sharp teeth, they burned themselves into the darkest corners of my mind. In my panicked retreat, I tripped, crashing clumsily against a redwood, snapping branches and sending a shower of leaves spiraling down around me. The chilling sounds of whatever that was stopped. Silence descended, heavy and ominous. It became horrifyingly clear I'd drawn its attention. Suddenly, a primal instinct took over. Embracing a newfound talent for running like hell, I bolted. I sprinted back towards the distant flicker of light that was my cabin, a fearsome howl tearing through the woods behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tore through thickets of ferns, vaulted over tangled roots, the unspeakable dread of being hunted clawing at my spine. I burst through the cabin door, slamming it shut with a force that rattled the flimsy frame. I fumbled with the deadbolt, throwing it into place just as I collapsed onto the floor, relief washing over me in a dizzying wave. But even as I gasped for breath, heart hammering against my ribs, trembling limbs slowly starting to steady, a chilling thought wormed its way into my mind. A simple deadbolt. Would that even slow down something like that? There was little time for second guessing. No room to dwell on how foolish I'd been to dismiss those bones I'd found weeks ago. This wasn't some ordinary forest problem solvable with sturdy locks or tall fences. This was an unbound nightmare unleashed into an unsuspecting world. I scrambled for my phone, fingers clumsy with fear. Then, the cold, hard reality hit me. No signal, of course. Deep in these woods, I was completely cut off. With shaking hands, I pulled out my shotgun, the weight of it offering a small measure of grim comfort. I loaded it, the metallic clack echoing in the sudden silence of the cabin, and braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. My fate, I knew, might well be decided in the next few moments. Just as dread solidified into certainty, a tree-splitting crash shattered the quiet. The creature had arrived. It was at my door, peeking through the window, heart leaping into my throat. I saw it. The grotesque visage, leering back at me. Eyes burning with a hateful malevolence that promised to haunt my dreams forever. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I fought it back. I couldn't just freeze here, waiting for it to break down the door. As it paced back and forth just outside, a dark shape against the gloom, I scanned the cabin, desperate for anything that could help. My gaze fell on the shotgun. No, useless if it got too close. Then, an idea sparked. In the corner of the room, coiled haphazardly, was an old rope. Just what I needed. Snatching it up, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I frantically started fashioning a crude trap. Everyday objects in the cabin became components: the rope, a heavy piece of firewood to act as a counterweight. Meticulously, desperately, I set up my makeshift barricade right by the entrance, hoping to buy myself some precious time. No sooner was everything in place than the creature attacked. Ferocity exploded against the cabin walls. The timbers shuddered as it hurled itself at the door with full, monstrous force. The moment it burst through, my clumsy trap sprang into action. The counterweight flew upwards, and the other end of the rope whipped around its legs like a snare. It roared, a sound that was part animalistic fury, part something else, something ancient and unholy. Momentarily thrown off balance, it stumbled, disoriented, but it recovered quickly, snapping and snarling, razor teeth gnashing in a desperate attempt to tear through the bindings. It was then, watching it struggle, that the full weight of my isolation crashed down on me. Calling for help was a fantasy. No cell signal. No one close enough to reach me in time. It was just me and this thing, with no other options. With every cell in my body screaming for survival, I gritted my teeth, braced myself, and prepared for another brutal, desperate battle against time. As if sensing my resolve, the creature's snarls only intensified, growing more vicious by the second. Its black eyes, fixed on me, burned with relentless hatred as it fought against my makeshift restraints. Then, just as my instincts screamed that it was starting to break free, fate, or something like it, intervened. For reasons I couldn't fathom, it suddenly seemed to take stock of its surroundings. Maybe it was the distant sound of a gunshot, echoing faintly through the night, that startled it. Whatever the reason, it seemed flustered. As flustered as something so monstrous could be. Abruptly, It abandoned its furious attempts to chew through the rope. And then, with terrifying speed, it turned and bolted, sprinting back out into the inky blackness of the woods. Left alone in the shattered remains of my cabin. It took several minutes for the adrenaline to recede, for the trembling to lessen, for me to fully grasp that I had, somehow, escaped death's grasp, at least for now. But standing there, still shaking from the ordeal, one thing was brutally clear. There was no going back to normal life after this. Overcome with bone, deep fatigue, I knew tonight wouldn't be the peaceful, celebratory evening I'd originally envisioned. Surveying the damage, I couldn't help but wonder if my improvised trap would even hold up when the creature inevitably returned. The harrowing truth remained: this monster had invaded my world, and I was now painfully aware of just how utterly inadequate my defenses were against it. Could I ever truly feel safe again, knowing this unfathomable abomination was lurking in the shadows? More determined than ever to protect myself and what little I had left, I slowly began a tireless process of fortifying my home, setting traps both inside and outside the cabin. Every waking moment became fraught with anxiety, but also with a laser focus on survival. It became my new reality. This terrifying tightrope walk between everyday existence and constant vigilance against an unseen enemy. One who had no qualms about preying on innocent people like me. And then there were the others. Those who had already fallen victim to this horror. Though my own story wasn't yet finished, theirs were eternally sealed. My heart ached for them, these unknown souls, known only through whispered campfire tales, and the loved ones they'd left behind. Yet, despite feeling their loss deeply, as I stood on the very soil that had likely witnessed their final moments, I refused to become just another notch on this creature's twisted belt.